glad that we have an informal group tonight. You guys are going to have a lot of fun with this, and I'm hoping that we spend just as much time in questions as we do with this presentation. A little more. Make you think that my point is to stand here and worry. It's actually fun. So you want to run it from down there, or? No, we'll start in just a few seconds. But before we do, I'm going to find out who everyone is and all that. So first of all, is the person who's hosting, who's organizing this event here? Yeah, right.
I'm the guy who got you.
Thank you. I didn't recognize it. Different clothes spaces me every time. So I thought it'd be good if he explained it. I don't know. Has everyone been to the one last month, or do we have some new people here? You're new? Great. Why don't you take a second to tell them why you organized this event? After a year of not having meetups in this category, we have begun doing them again, and it's because of this gentleman. So just say a bit about it.
I'm Rich Bowman, and I also run the AngularJS group in Denver, and I noticed that there are 300 plus people in the jQuery group, and it had been dormant for a while, so I wanted to get meetups back on the calendar. Picked up a sponsor in CNTech, and we're just trying to get these meetups going again, so any input you have into speakers that you'd like to hear about, or topics that you'd like covered, that'd be great. Definitely want to get some input from the community, and again, we're just trying to get these rolling. We had a happy hour last month, and that's where I met these folks here. And they have a great idea for social media Web 3.0 application in the browser that is based on jQuery. And so I thought it'd be great to have them step up this month and present.
And he's not kidding. We came here, we didn't know anyone, and now we're presenting. So if you have a cool idea that you want to share next time, go right ahead. Or know somebody's interested in that. But there is a thriving community of people who use jQuery in Denver. They don't always get out of their office buildings. They don't always realize that this venue exists. So we're just going to keep doing this no matter how many people show up. The less is better in my mind, because we all get to know each other. I don't know what to do with a room full of 100 people, honestly. But there is so much potential for Denver as a tech city. I mean, there's a lot of free-thinking people, people who care. They use them in their jobs. You go to a place like San Francisco, you're going to get overwhelmed, not with numbers, but the fact that everyone has a bit of a cynical attitude. They've all seen it. They don't know what's going on. They don't work together so much because everybody's got their own private plan. Denver is, when I say liberal, I don't mean politically. I mean energy-wise. We're all interested in doing our things, and I think there's a chance that this city could get, this is my personal opinion after traveling a lot, that this city has the potential for teamwork and people talking to each other that doesn't exist in larger cities where they're just too used to seeing a million people. So how many people here, by the way, do use jQuery? Is it everybody here who's used it? And could we go around and just, since it's so few people, which I really do like, can we all just go around and say how we use it? It would help me a lot. First of all, I use it, of course, for my job, and the stuff you'll see tonight is a project that I made, but I have a background in Python, Objective-C, doing other things, and it wasn't until what you see tonight that I really focused on jQuery and realized how it helped me. So let's go around and see why any of you use it. How does it help you? If we could start.
I'm Steve. I actually have been trying to learn it to incorporate it into Oracle applications. So I work for Oracle, and then I've been learning Oracle Applications Express.
Oh, cool.
You can incorporate JavaScript, jQuery libraries in there. So
I didn't know that Oracle had a place in Denver. They do?
Yeah. Yeah, well, they took over the Sun office when they bought that 5 years ago.
Nice. Cool. And your name, sir?
John.
John? And why do you use jQuery?
I use jQuery a lot for a large website that use it for front-end stuff.
Use it for front-end stuff.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Is there any reason you use jQuery as opposed to other things like Prototype or whatever?
Basically, our site is a Drupal site, and so we use jQuery, and so
cool. Okay. Your name, sir?
My name's Jack. I work with newspapers. I work with the Denver Post for about 14 years now. I go around and install advertising systems that are cloud-based, and help people do outsourcing. So.
And jQuery helps you present ads?
Well, we're in the midst of rewriting a whole bunch of things, trying to incorporate a lot more of interactive advertising, everything like that. So I'm trying to get in that whole bandwagon with our company already. So.
Parenthetically, I know that Django is used a lot in the news industry. I'm from the East Coast, where a lot of the media centers in New York and DC use backends. The Python-based backends. What backends do you use in your job?
Well, right now I'm just trying to find out what everything is built on. Like, I'm more in the integration part, the training and the integration, but I see a lot of the application applications and the way we need to change the way our interface is right now. So
Understood.
so I'm just trying to get it out.
Your name?
Brian.
And
I
Brian.
was Cientech, so yeah,
Oh, yeah, you should come up here and tell us a bit about yourself. I don't know as much about CNTech as I should.
So we're a small boutique staffing firm based in Westminster, and we've got a lot of clients who use front end JavaScript, a lot of the newer libraries, and obviously jQuery is still an integral part of JavaScript, and a lot of people use it. Obviously, there's other libraries out there, but we certainly have a huge need for front end developers, and jQuery goes right along with that. So
Makes sense.
yeah.
Your name?
My name is John Pike. I work with a company that builds healthcare data. I know nothing about jQuery, so I'm a virgin.
What else do you use?
Pure JavaScript shop.
Oh, cool.
If jQuery can speed us up, I'm interested in that.
When you say per JavaScript, does that mean JavaScript for computation in the browser or for user interfaces?
Both.
For both.
User interfaces is about a third of our business.
What kind of computation do you do?
Pardon me?
What kind of health-related computation do you do?
We have traditionally built, our clients are hospitals and health plans. We have traditionally built for over 23 years the provider database for Colorado. He just started working for Healthways.
Yeah, I did. And I have to say, I really like that office. I had mentioned to someone else that in DC, I couldn't stand working in an office. People didn't smile at each other on the metro. It was a horrible commute. The office itself felt like a cave, and you guys have a really nice place to be. Not the least of which is all the chai tea that they have in the center. I'm glad to see you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here, but the rest of the story I really didn't want to say. I told you something that I didn't want you to know.
That's fair.
That's fair. I suppose I'll figure it out later.
Oh, there you go.
Sherlock Holmes did. And Rich, you should tell us at least, you said you ran the Angular JS workshop. You organized this obviously, but what are some personal interests and how do you use jQuery for work at all?
Probably right now predominantly jQuery Lite within Angular JS, but for many years I used jQuery, jQuery UI, that sort of stuff to build front ends for websites. So.
Any particular type of website or just generic contract work?
Yeah, a whole bunch of different contracts and stuff. Yeah,
cool.
A lot of different variety of stuff.
So everybody here has the rudiments of, Brian, I don't know if it applies to you, but everyone else has the rudiments of JavaScript down. It would change my talk to know that I was speaking with people who understood at that level, which is good. Well, great. If anyone wants to add anything while we're talking, it's an informal group, feel free to jump in. The presentation that I'm going to give, I'm not going to orate every slide. My mother was an instructional designer. If there's one thing I've learned is when you're showing people when they're reading stuff, they're not thinking. So the point of this isn't to read, for me to say what's on the screen. We're going to skip through that pretty fast if possible to orient ourselves, and then we'll have a look at the real product and have a chance to do sort of back and forth. And one of the things that matters to me the most, of course, is when you look at this, I'm curious to see where your minds go. If you had the capabilities that you see here, would it affect you? If it did affect you, how? And if it doesn't affect you, that's important too. So criticism, both good and bad, I appreciate it. You know, whether you really get it or not. And I should state that Dan is a person I've known since second grade. I know him from DC, where we both grew up. I came to Colorado because of his influence, and we worked together on this project for almost 2 years now. I did all the coding, or most of the coding. He is an excellent technical writer and has a background in some computer science stuff too, so he was able to theorize with me, and we stayed up more times than I want to talk about, late into the night arguing about minuscule little points. So he may jump in at some points to fill in things that I miss, or things like that. So one of the things I wanted to start out with first is that what we're going to do tonight is introduce an entire new way of thinking about what a browser can do for you, both as a developer and as a user. If I say Web 1.0, does that make sense to everyone what that is? Is there anyone here who doesn't know what Web 1.0 is? I'll say it anyway, but I just wanted to see. Web 1.0 is the idea that an application is generated using HTML, which is a subset of XML, and the server defines what happens in the browser. So, hello, this is the jQuery Meetup. We were just getting started.
I'm a closer, but
Oh, okay, hello.
I'm a jQuery person.
Good, well, Later on at the end of the evening, if you want to come over here, we could give you some information you could walk away with that would help you figure it out after the fact.
Just tell him if he gets bored, come on.
Well, I wouldn't want to make it sound like they'd be bored, but I do think you won't be bored with this once I get into it. Please forgive me if it takes 20 minutes to get into it. I want to make sure we're kind of all on the page when I start showing what it is. But there is something cool to look at, and by the time you guys are done, I'll be giving you invites to the service, free and all that, of course. So when you get home, you can use everything you're seeing in your own projects immediately. It's just part of what we wanted to do. So Web 1.0 is the idea that XML is generated on a server, and it's sent to the client. Every time the client performs an action, a new set of XML is sent to the client. In that architecture, the server controls what you see and what your options as an application are. Now, that's the way that people normally look at web development. They believe that it is creating text on a server by listening to a database, by looking at files and adding them together to come up with a set of HTML that defines what you want to show to the user. If there's no questions, I'll skip on to what Web 2.0 is, which is the idea that XML is generated on the server the same way in Web 1.0. When it gets to the client, JavaScript, which wasn't introduced with HTML originally, JavaScript wasn't a part of HTML until 1998, I believe, with the introduction of what they call DHTML, or dynamic HTML, allows you to not only get an application from the server to the client, but once it's on the client, things can change in the application that the server didn't need to explicitly do. A wonderful example of that is showing a piece of data. The server may have created a document that hides a piece of data, and the user, by clicking on something, can cause that data to be shown. Very simple example, but it proves why Web 2.0 was more efficient than 1.0. There's a lot of stuff you would not want the user to go all the way back to a server to see. If you have a whole bunch of table of contents, you wouldn't want to have to generate the entirety of a page and have the user scroll through it. You'd rather make them, have them make the choice of what they want to see on the client. So Web 2.0 was introduced with Gmail, and basically that's when people first became aware of it. And for a lot of people, they didn't believe that the browser could go that fast. I mean, they expected a round trip from their browser to the server and back, so when they went into their mail and clicked on a message and it popped up immediately, that was magic. It didn't exist before then. And it made things a lot quicker. Since then, of course, Web 2.0 is in more or less every application you use online, with minimal exceptions, Craigslist being a great one. I believe Craigslist is still just pure HTML. Most sites you visit today have some sort of JavaScript that affects it. So examples of that are, anything from Facebook to Google Maps to blogs that are able to let you navigate their content. Now, the importance of Web 2.0 wasn't just that the user could make decisions about how the application was run. It was also that less information needed to go across the network connection. If you're in Web 1.0, the entirety of the display, all of the choices about what comprises an application has to come over the wire. In Web 2.0, you could just get data. Does everyone here know what JSON is? So JSON is a format that allows you to specify data, and the server could send just that data to the front end, and then the front end could make choices on how to display it. So instead of sending a huge page, which you must do every time something changes, the front end could now request a small bit of data, and that bit of data could be displayed, potentially leading to a huge change in the interface, but with a decrease in the amount of information that a server needed to show. So one of the big reasons to have Web 2.0 was that it was more efficient, that it required less of your server and more, of course, from the computation on the client to make that work. And that's where we've stopped. Web 2.0 has been the big thing in the internet experience for the past 8 years, obviously, but it was with the rise of mobile browsers, cell phones, iPhones, iPads, that it actually became feasible to fully embrace it. And the reason that is because cell phones and iPads don't have the processor power to do a lot of JavaScript as browsers were. So Apple, Google, Motorola invested literally billions of dollars into, well, billions if you look at the entire economy. I'm sure for them they invested a bit less into making these browsers faster so that it would run on a phone, so that it was possible to have a minimal level of Web 2.0 experience on a device that would otherwise be limited. The benefit is that those optimizations were backported into desktop browsers. So before, when JavaScript was seen as an add-on, it was seen as from a computer science point of view, something that was hacked into the mix. After the optimizations that were made to make it work on cell phones, desktop browsers were now capable of doing computation that was never before possible in a browser. The speed of adding interfaces, the speed of parsing, the amount of information you could deal with went up by at least 2 magnitudes. I mean, it's not a small thing. So in a way, mobile devices created this new opportunity to redefine what browsers did. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Web 3.0. And were you to look online, you may or may not find out that that's a buzzword or used in any number of contexts that may mean something or may not. It may just be people saying, we're Web 3.0 because we have some really cool application that does some service that is in excess of what people expect from Web 2.0, but it didn't represent an architectural change. It's still XML from a server that gets processed by JavaScript that does something. So I would define Web 3.0 as what happens when a client, in other words, where your data goes, isn't just responsible for changes against application you're given, but that the entirety of the application you run is determined by the client. So a good analogy is a desktop operating system. You download a program, you install it on your computer, and it runs. You do not expect that a program you installed on your computer would be in conflict with another program you install on your computer. If you have Notepad and Photoshop, if you have a web browser and Excel, you expect them to all run at the same time. And you expect them to run without any development work on your part. You don't have to be a developer to do these things. For anyone who's not aware, it is not normal to be able to take 2 web applications and put them together on the same page and require them to work. There's a few reasons for that, but I just want to emphasize that applications are very much a monolithic thing. You expect to get an application from a provider, and that's the end of it. You run what they give you. Web 3.0 is the idea that you can put any number of applications together in a browser to get the same increase in efficiency that you experienced with windowed operating systems back in the early 80s. Browsers have remained a single application experience, and it's about time we shook that up a little bit. So Web 3.0 is the idea that your browser is in complete control not only of what you run, but that when you run things, they work together without conflict. That as a developer, you need to expend no extra energy to run 2 things at the same time. Now, what's the benefit of running 2 things at the same time? I'll list a few, and if you have any other ideas, let me know. Drag and drop. If you have 2 applications running in a windowed environment, you can drag from this application to this application with a benefit and efficiency. You expect that if you're in Excel and you copy a row, that you can paste that into another Excel document or into Notepad, or that you can copy a picture from Photoshop and put it into Microsoft Paint. The reason to have more than one application in a web page is because it allows the applications to work together. Now, drag and drop is one good example. Text selection, copy and paste is another good example. And the file system is yet another example. When you're using your computer, you expect to be able to save a picture in one application and load it in another application. Now, with your experience in the web, I believe you all understand that if you save a piece of information in a website, you do not automatically expect that another website could access that and do something with it. It'd be like saying Google Plus could read your Facebook messages or your pictures. So I just wanted to point out that the file system represents a means of working that's really important. You may not realize it, but a file system lets you put information between 2 programs. So the benefit of having a windowed operating system with a file system is that we have an economy, a digital economy, where literally thousands of applications can work together via means that we all understand and that we're actually used to. From my point of view, having developed what I wrote tonight, it is nonsensical that a web browser would not enjoy the same advantage. Without what I've developed tonight, it is almost impossible to view a web page as having that capability. I mean, how would one web team work with another web team, especially if they've never communicated with each other, to make such a thing possible? So, Nametag is the name of the project that we'll put out tonight, and that we'll present tonight. And it is many things. It's not just one thing. It is related to semantic application development, something I haven't defined, but some of you may know what semantics mean in terms of HTML. But what we have done is make it possible to not only define applications in a browser, but to use object-oriented programming not against just data, not just against a program, but against the interfaces themselves to get every advantage you're used to from a desktop environment to occur in a browser. Now that does not mean that we've written an operating system or anything like it in the strict sense. We haven't developed a C-level interpretation layer. We haven't developed a frame buffer. We haven't developed, you know, a USB extender that lets you plug things into your computer. What we have done at a top level is provided the features you need to recreate the advantages you get from using a desktop computer. So when I say operating system, when I refer to our work as an operating system later in the night, remember that I'm only speaking about the advantages of a windowed operating system, not the way they're technically put together. So the slides that I'm about to go through are meant to define the field as, you know, in more detail than I just did, but I'll try to go through them fairly quickly, and if there's something that you don't understand or want me to, you know, get into, let me know. So we say it's a true application language for the browser, not the server, because again, the browser makes the choices, no longer the server. A server may give you our environment, but once it's loaded, the choice of what happens is in your hands. And that is not only a big point, but it has implications for freedom and everything else that's involved with using your computer as something you own, that has repercussions across the entire concept of what a web browser does. So it works in HTML4 or 5. The technology itself is written against HTML4 standards. HTML5, as you may know, are added abilities to HTML4. It does not represent a diversion from the concept of what HTML is. So there is no reason to separate HTML4 and 5. We run in both. You can pick which one you want. It doesn't make a difference. We just want to point out that there's nothing in HTML5 that powers what we've done. Theoretically, you could have done what we did 8 years ago. We didn't have to wait for mobile. We didn't have to wait for HTML5. All of this runs in the concept of what HTML is. DOM natural is a term that you'll come to understand a bit later in our presentation, but it means you can use the HTML you know. Everybody who here has not written a one-liner HTML application, a div, hello world? Anyone? You have not. Great. So a hello world in HTML, and I do want to reach out to people who haven't seen this before. It's as simple as putting an open tag and a close tag. Who cares what those are? You put hello world in the middle. For comparison, environments like Java, Python, even Visual Basic require a fair amount of boilerplate before you can even do that. So when we say DOM natural, what we mean is our programs work with HTML, so what you've learned about how simple it is to create an application in HTML applies to this entire environment. So what you'll see extends the idea. We're not taking you in a whole new direction. We, of course, use jQuery. That's why we're here tonight, and jQuery templates. Does anyone here not know what jQuery templates is? Except for yourself, of course. Everyone knows what jQuery templates are? So just to point it out, there is no longer development being done on jQuery templates. Why would I choose to write my entire application on a product that is no longer being maintained? It's because jQuery templates implements the subset of functionalities that I need perfectly. There is no alteration I want to make to it. There is no further advance that needs to be done for the role that it plays in the project. Just as a quick refresher, jQuery templates is a way of printing HTML into an HTML page using JavaScript. So when you make HTML, it's all on one page and it all gets rendered. End of story. As a programmer, you would like to be able to define other pieces of HTML that are brought into your application after the fact. For instance, you might make a page that shows people a list of names, and then when you click on a name, you might want to see their address. Well, in normal HTML, all of that display would have to be included at the time you loaded the page. The idea of jQuery templates is that you can actually write pieces of HTML that are not included in your application until you want them to be. And that's a big difference. There was no way to do that before jQuery templates came on the scene. And there's a lot of people who have derived their work from this, but jQuery templates was the first. It's also the best in my opinion, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. It is, yeah. So when you create a piece of HTML, it's not useful to just have a separate piece of HTML for every name in your list. What you want is one piece of HTML where the names are variable. So I have a piece of HTML, and depending on how I make it, it'll have one name or the other, and I can stamp out as many of those as I want. So the idea that you have a piece of HTML that's callable by the developer is important. And it should be noted, and this is for people who have experience writing, good experience writing web pages, there is no mechanism in HTML4 or 5 to include HTML after the page has been loaded. You can't do it. Once the page has been loaded, you can include more CSS. You can include more JavaScript. But there is no mechanism in HTML to bring in yet more HTML to continue the process. It's one of the things that we're providing. Finally, by being DOM natural, by extending jQuery and jQuery templates, by being HTML4 and 5, we integrate with HTML projects as it exists. I don't care what framework you're using. Drupal, AngularJS, name your flavor. There's a dozen of them, of course. What I'll show you tonight will work in that page without alteration, regardless of what you've used before. And that's actually an important point, because if you're doing server-side generation, if you're making your page on the server, the only way to change an application is to change what's on the server. What we do is on the client. So when you make an application, you can affect what that application is, or you can add to it in the client using this technology no matter how you made it. So the benefit is that by learning this technology, you don't need to worry about how someone made a page. You can make it do more, you can extend it, and it doesn't matter how they made it. So there's value in learning that mechanism simply because as a programmer, it makes your output applicable to any situation you find yourself in, so long as it's a web page you're working with. So some of this we're going to skip over quickly. Semantic control of application content means, of course, that we're bringing in applications at the time the page is loaded. What's loaded in the page does not define what it needs to be. We can bring more in after the fact. Cross-platform, that's HTML. I mean, HTML runs on a phone, it runs on desktops, it runs on PCs and Macs. So having this ability means that you can inject code on anybody who uses it. It doesn't matter what the platform is. Now, reusability and instant portability means that by bringing HTML into a page, regardless of its backend, you can use what you'll see tonight into an application without considering anything they've done and how they made it. When we say automatically generated UUIDs to ensure compatibility, what we mean is we are giving you a mathematical guarantee that what you write will work next to somebody else. Now, I want to talk about that for a quick second. Everyone here is probably familiar with the idea of using IDs in code. And what an ID does is lets you address a node in your document no matter where it is. Now, the benefit is that it's easy. You put an ID on something, you can access it. The problem is that if you have two teams working on code, and one person uses the word foo for a variable, and the other person uses the word foo for a variable, they cannot work together. So it's called globals. It's the idea that you have an environment that by its very nature cannot accommodate any code you get from anyone else. They must know how you made your page to do more work. So by having UUIDs in our environment, which you'll see how, we can guarantee that you do not need to know how a person made a page, and that in fact you'll take everything we've seen tonight and you can put it on any page on the internet and guarantee that it'll work. It's kind of a big thing. And finally, this will make sense to people who work with jQuery, page load events at the element level. Now, what that means, of course, is you want opportunities to change the page. Maybe that's when the page is beginning to load. Maybe that's when the page has finished loading. But you want to be able to run your logic against the page when it's done. You may recognize that there's no way to do that on an element level. You cannot say, this div is finished loading, therefore I want to do something. You have one shot and one shot only. The page is loaded and you do something. Now, I was saying that you want to put HTML in your page. You want to make stuff after it started. Well, you could see how, if you only have one page load event, what are you supposed to do when you add an application? What event do you have to work against the addition of something if you only have one opportunity to add code? So as part of this concept, you have the ability to react not only to when a page is loaded, but to a large number of opportunities. In fact, every time an application or even a tag is put in the page, you can do something. We'll cover what those opportunities are in a bit. We, of course, believe, as we're done with this, that we extend HTML and give you more capabilities. So some of this, of course, we're going to go over quick too. HTML is evolved from XML. If you know what XML is, any HTML application well written should be HTML. We do know that HTML4 is not in fact XHTML. But if you're using XHTML, which is a subset of HTML that's required to adhere to the standards of XML, then any HTML is XML. And what's the importance of that? It means that you can use DOM operations and the rest of it to manipulate your program. I mean, if I get a piece of HTML that represents my program, if indeed it's XML, then I can use the DOM, I can use mechanisms and methods to inspect it and change it before it's made. In XML, and this is an important part, XML can have a tag of any name, unlike HTML. Now, XML is meant for data. Let's say we're defining what's on this table. We would say that this is a table element. We would say this is a chair element in the data element. These are blocks on the chair, and this is a projector on here. Now, we did that by defining custom names. I mean, this is a table tag, this is a chair tag, this is a block tag, this is a projector tag, and they're all inside of each other. When you deal with HTML, you don't just generically have any name you want. They give you a subset. Those subsets are divs, spans, ps, the rest of it. Now, why did they choose the subset? It's because they're doing magazine rendering. They're making a simile to a printing press. The tag informs the layout. So if you use a div tag, it means that it's dividing the page into sections. If you use a span, it's spanning space across the page. If you use a p, it's a paragraph. Now, that doesn't relate to what it does, just how it's laid out. So we could say this is a div, and this is a div, and this is a div, and this is a div, but that didn't tell us very much about the table. So I just wanted to point out that HTML is not meant to express logic. It's not meant to say what an application is or to divide them. It really was meant for display purposes, which we will show isn't the end of what you can do with it. And then we just want to point out that everything in our environment is well formed. We are XHTML. We're not playing around with BR tags that have no clothes on them. When you work with our environment, it is XHTML. Does it have to be that way? Maybe not, but I'm a stickler for it. And that's how I think all code should be written. I also love indentations, Cindy.
So is this something that you created, TagOS?
Yes, absolutely. So there's no concept that a tag would have names. There's no concept that you can divide an application or a web page into segments that you decide what happens after the fact. HTML is how it is. The name tag itself is kind of a pun. I like double entendres. It's name tag because tags can have names. It's also because it's a social media component. We wanted, a name tag is something you can take off and put another one on. When you go to a party, no one's telling you what your name tag has to be. But that's a social media thing which is somewhat separate from the programming language which enables it. This is an important one. Do people know what model-based programming is? Angular would be a model-based environment. Handlebars would be, I believe, Mustache would be. Can you come up with some model-based environments for me?
Backbone, Angular, just a bunch.
It's not bad. So what a model-based environment means is that you, as a programmer, specify the data, and it is someone else's problem to figure out the interface. You affect the interface by changing the data. The reason that can sometimes, as a pattern, cause problems is because people who use model-based programming like boilerplate, they only want to deal with the data. As someone who deals with a list of names, I don't want to be bothered to learn HTML. I don't even like interfaces. So the goal of a model-based layout is to divorce itself from the interface entirely. What that means is it is easy to get basic things done. As a corollary, it's very difficult to customize a model-based layout in terms of getting an interface exactly like you like it. It's extremely simple to get a list of names with the behavior because it was designed to take data and bind it. But if you want to make each individual output of the name work, not only, of course, do you have to have some knowledge of UI, but the framework itself may not be designed to give you that freedom. What model-based programming is meant to do is to make it so that people don't have to know about interfaces to create a program. And while that may be noble in some situations, it works against common programming languages you find in other environments. For instance, Cocoa, iPad, is a view-based environment. When you create a Cocoa application, you're actually dealing with rectangular areas that are views that you assemble however you want. And it's that freedom of expression that makes programming in something like Cocoa and iPhones and iPads and Macs so alluring to the user. The interfaces can do almost anything you think of. When you deal with model-based environments for a web page, unless you're a really good programmer, in which case anything's possible, people usually get stuck at the data phase and they get to a certain point and then it's very difficult to extend past that point. Nametag is a view-based environment. What that means is it is meant to make it very simple to work with interfaces themselves and to have the power you're used to in a desktop application be present in a web application. And we'll get back to that. There's this thing called James's Law. He called it that and I'd like to keep it. Ideally, an API for a user interface should be indistinguishable from the API of the data element itself. That means if I have a list on the screen, a user interface with any number of items, I should be able to manipulate the user interface using the same API that I manipulate a list. how do you manipulate a list? You can push, you can pop, you might be able to slice or add things. Well, if I have a list of names and I want to add one more, then I say list push name. In a user interface, ideally, you should be able to do the same thing. You should be able to say, here's a user interface, push a new name on the bottom. So if you have a dictionary, which is key value, the point is, you should be able to ask an interface for the data that drives it at any time, dealing with it in a way that makes sense for data. So if I have a user interface, how do I save what's in that interface? Say I have a list of 10 names and I add an 11th. As a programmer, how do I get the list of 11 names? Ideally, I just ask for a list, and it gives me back what it is. Ideally, I add an item to the list, and the interface comes up automatically. In other words, I should not have to explicitly combine the two. Adding to the list is the same thing as adding to an interface. And when you look at a multi-control like a spreadsheet, that's a two-dimensional list. If you have a spreadsheet, there's there's cells, and then the cells are in columns, and so you end up with this two-dimensional display of data. Ideally, if you wanted to edit what was in that spreadsheet, you would change the list. Everything else should happen automatically. Now that's an idealistic statement. In other words, when you abstract the problem far enough, that's all you should have. You should, as a programmer, be able to know that something as simple as a list lets you do something as complicated as add a new visual item. How does it really work? Not here, but I'm talking about in traditional technologies. You have to know the API, sometimes very specifically, and you keep that information separate. Here's your list. And if something gets added, you specifically call something else over here. So as a programmer, you have dual responsibilities. You have to manage your data, you have to manage the UI, and you have to know how that UI works specifically to achieve your point. So we wrote this with that in mind. The idea that you should be able to have an interface, that you should be able to use simple concepts to extend and manipulate the interfaces you have. And I just want to ask at this point, is everything okay? Does that all make sense? That's good. Not talking too fast. Great. Some of this will make more sense after we jump in. I might skip this a little bit. But there's one thing I don't want to skip, which is nested and recursive. When you use HTML, it's recursive. What that means is you can always put a div inside of another div. If I have a box, I can always put another box inside of it. Indeed, I can take that whole box with another box inside of it and put it into something else. It is the nature of XML, XHTML, and HTML to be recursive. Now, when you write programming environments, Cocoa is a good example of this. But in general, you are not free to take any given user interface and put it into any other given user interface. If I have a list control in WX Python or Windows GUI, I can't put a list inside of a list. I can't take a dropdown, and HTML is a great example. A dropdown has a list of text in it. I cannot arbitrarily put any user interface I want into the dropdown list. I can't just say, here's a picture and a name, and now let's put it into the dropdown. The dropdown only supports text. That's not recursive. Recursive means you can put anything inside of anything else. And as I mentioned, HTML and XML are like that, but we'll show you in the end how you can get things like dropdowns that have those features. And as far as I know, and welcome to take corrections, there is no other environment on the web that displays a truly recursive nature, except for HTML itself, unadulterated with logic. So HTML itself can be recursively put inside of itself forever, but you can't put a script tag in a script tag. So your logic is flat while your interface is nested. What we do is make both the interface and the logic nested. And there is an advantage to that. The advantage is any given program you see can be put into any other given program. And there's some real productivity advantages there we'll get into. So I just wanted to point out really quick, this is what it means to have a named tag and something inside of it. You'll see here, instead of calling it div, we called it my tag. And it could be any program you want. Then you have XML inside of it. Now you can imagine my tag inside of this area here. So that's recursive, just pointing out that the thing inside of itself is recursive. Now you also notice that we have code here. We'll get to this in a little bit, but we allow you to put code in tags. If we didn't put code in tags, it wouldn't be recursive. Any language that has script tags on one side and views on the other is by definition flat. There's nothing you can do about it. If you can put code in a tag, now you're free to take the code and put it inside itself, inside itself, inside itself. Now no one else I'm aware of, except for OpenLazlo, allows you to put code in tags. And we do that with text processing. It's really neat. It's kind of like the basics of all this. So what I'd like to do now, before I go on to this, is show you a real program running so that you understand what I'm going towards, and then we'll come back towards this. So, this is the first time looking at it, and you don't have to understand everything you see, but it is meant to illustrate the power of having things that are recursive. What you're looking at is an environment written in this programming language, and what you're seeing inside of it is a program written inside of the environment. So what we have is a program that allows you to write programs in the programs. That's recursive. If we run it, you have a list here, just like you might have with LI tags. And you'll notice that each element of this list, sorry, that should be a 10. Can you run it again? Each element of this list has another list inside of it. So you'll see here I'm able to select items. Here I'm able to select items. So what it's showing is I've put a list inside of a list. We'll get to how I do that in a second. But the idea that you have, the reason I'm showing you this environment is I'm going to show you demonstrations here. I don't want you to get confused. The language itself is what you see in the window. The fact that I made an environment is not worth looking at the moment. Just focus on the code that's in the window. So we'll make this bigger, something HTML allows me to do. And I'm going to make a duplicate of this file to not mess it up. So I duplicated it, now I have my copy here. I'll rename it to test.app, and then I'm going to edit that. Okay. So, the very simplest name tag program is a div. Now, for those who know HTML, you'll notice I didn't put in a close tag. The reason I didn't put a close tag is because of that line you see on the top that says dialect shiml. I know, dialect is too complex a word for it. What it means is I am processing this to turn it into HTML. So whatever you see here is in fact good HTML by the time I'm done.
Is that Python carryover?
It is if you see Python, it's an indented language. So I applied the same concept to HTML. I hate writing close tags. Everyone does. We just don't know how to get around it. This does. Indents work to say where the closes are. So I get to skip a whole bunch of what I perceive to be pointless typing.
But to reiterate, you don't need to use shiml to use name tags.
Right, if I got rid of that line, it would be standard HTML.
You opt into it, you can opt into it.
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to confuse people coming to the environment, so it's your choice how that works. So here I'm going to make the simplest possible HTML program. It says div, and it's got a hi in it, and I get a window with hi. Now, I won't get into how name tag makes this window resizable and movable and all that stuff. I just want to focus on what's inside of it. And to wit, I'm going to do a few things which you guys should be familiar with. I am going to give it a color. I'm going to say it's red. And now I see that I have a background that's red. I'm going to come here and I'll do something else that's normal. I'll say style, color, blue. And you'll see that that didn't work because I put a colon instead of a semicolon. So here, if I expand that, you'll see it's a blue line. And in all forms, this is HTML just as you know it. So I'll put an input tag in there to prove it. Input type equals button. Name equals foo, so we can get to it later. And value equals click. Now you'll notice I didn't close it. I don't need to because of shiml. Also, I don't know if everyone can read that, so I'm going to make it bigger. Thank you. And when I run that, you'll see that I got rid of hi and I have a button click me that does nothing. So you can go on and have all the fun you want, form tags, inputs, drop downs, in this case select, and then you can say option 1, 2, 3. And now we see I have a drop down with 1, 2, 3. So I hope that that is familiar to everyone who has dealt with HTML. More to the point, you can do styling as a tag at the top. So I can say .foo and then say color green. And now down here, instead of saying color blue, I can add that class to it, say foo. And now I end up, well, there's no text in there, which is why you didn't see it. I'll come down here and put another div. Hi there. And we'll see that it is in fact green. So, although it looks like a normal HTML document, I should note that we're doing processing, in fact, to pull that out. The CSS for each application is discrete and contained within itself, so I'm not making a style tag in the document itself. There's just some magic going on to pull it out. So what's the point of doing this? Well, we can make any HTML application we're familiar with now using this. The point of name tag is that you can write code in the tag. That's what gives you the recursive capability. So let's make that click button do something. Now, one of the ways to do it, of course, the classic way of doing it is to put an on-click statement. So then we can say alert, hi. And now when I run this and I click on the button, I get an alert with hi. But of course, the problem with that is that your code is limited to the amount of stuff you can put into an attribute. Now, you can theoretically put as much as you want in there, but there's problems with quotes, it's uncomfortable, it's not fun. So let's put that same logic into code in the tag. And there's more than one way to do it. I'm going to use the most basic way of doing it. Now, you remember that I said there are events when you load something. And this is the first time you've seen 3 different things at once. This is code in tag. This is an event that occurs on the tag. And then I'm actually doing something in the event to respond to it getting made. So what I wanted you to notice is I'm not using an equal sign. Notice that this looks like a dictionary. That if I put squiggly brackets here, then it would be possible for you to interpret this stuff as an object, right? So what this is an object that defines a key load with a value that's a function that does something. So I get rid of these squigglies because they're put in for you implicitly and they just don't look good in XML. So what I wanted to point out is when you write this code, what you're doing is making a load attribute on the tag. So were I to get a reference to this div, it would have an attribute load, and that attribute load would equal this function. So in here I can say alert hi. Pardon me, if I did that, it would display hi when I ran the program. What I want to do is display hi when I click, and this is standard jQuery. So notice that I gave it a name foo. I'm going to use the typical jQuery mechanism to do it, which would be, well actually I won't use a typical one. I'm going to say self.
So you, maybe to kind of lay it out in terms that we're familiar with, what you've done with load there is you've added a new attribute to the DOM API, in a sense.
Right, in a sense I've made it possible by having an attribute on an element. There is a guarantee that when that element gets made, that will be fired upon it. And now this won't actually run, I'm sorry to say, because I need to tell my machinery that this is a node that should be acted upon. It's not every div that gets this capability. It's one that's been so annotated. So how do I annotate a node to get that functionality? Well, I put a class name tag on it. And what that means is, when this thing runs, it's going to look for nodes that have this class on it. And if it has that class, it's going to treat it differently. It's going to look for these events. It's going to do a whole bunch of stuff. So I'll run it after putting alert, And so what this is actually saying, by the way, I could have done this a different way. I elected to use the way I normally do it. Self is like this, but self will always point to the element no matter how many closures you're in. I mean, when you use this points to the function you're in, not the element. So self is automatically injected to give you that useful reference. JNamed says, find the thing inside of me, anywhere inside of me, named foo, and return to me the jQuery object. So when I'm done with this line here, I will have a jQuery object corresponding to this tag, because its name is foo. And this is saying, get me the thing named foo inside of myself and make it a jQuery object. Because I've made it a jQuery object, I can then call the typical functions on it, one of which is click, which is probably one of the more basic functions out there. And I'm going to write a function that has it do something. So at this point, we can run it. And when I click on it, indeed, yo pops up. So what this points out is that you can write code in tags, that it works well as a pattern. There's a lot of these. For what it's worth, you can do a init, you can do finished. Now the importance of that is it's the order in which they're done. On page load, you get one shot, you're done. When load gets called, it guarantees that everything else inside of it has already been made. When you have a script tag, it gets executed when you run into the script tag. The problem with that is you have to put all your script tags at the bottom of the document. If you don't, this stuff won't have been made yet. When you put it at the top, then the DOM won't have been made yet. So you have this problem where you put your code influences what has been made by the time you run into it. The cool thing about using load is that it guarantees that everything inside of you has been made before it runs. And That's
So,
what
sorry to interrupt.
No.
This is maybe a stupid question.
This is some of the most important stuff in
But,
here, so we want to
will
get
that work for if I have a bunch of assets like images, that tag, will it the load fire after those?
not after an image is loaded, only after DOM creation. So were you to want to run something, after an image had been loaded, and I'm just pseudocoding this, you would have to say, use the image.load feature and then do it after that. But this would attach the load handler afterwards. The problem with that is that the image may have already loaded by the time that happened. So you would say init, and then the benefit there is that when you attach the load document, that runs before everything inside of you has gotten made. So no, it doesn't control loading things like images, but that's the only exception. Everything else is part of the DOM. Drop-downs, lists, everything else would be made as a DOM. The problem with load, of course, is it's asynchronous. It has to go back to the server. So if I were to wait for it, that would be, it may never run, because the image may never load.
It's asynchronous for a reason.
Yeah. So we're just going to pass beyond that. Now, that's great that I have that sort of thing. And of course, I can put in more attributes. For instance, I can say, something equals whatever. And now what I will do is say, when I do the alert, I will say print out self.something. And so we should expect when this runs that whatever pops up. Pardon me, I clicked on it, bring that back. And now we see it says yo whatever. Because this is an attribute that exists, self is the element, so on and so forth. So that's kind of neat, and it's nice that it does that. But the power of nametag isn't just that it allows you to assign functions and attributes. It's that it takes the presence of certain attributes and uses it as an instruction to extend the API of the object. Now, one of the things that's really impossible to do in HTML by itself is a multi-selectable list. Take a list of divs and make it possible to select 7 of them. There's no facility for it. It doesn't exist. You can create a list, fine. You can even put a click handler on that list. But there's nothing to control the state and to keep track of what's selected and what's not. So let's introduce one of the most powerful options that exists, and I call these options. Something is an option, load is a delegate, but it's also an option. It's in the option block. So what we have here is one template inside of it. So we have, oh, I'm sorry, one more thing I want to do. Do you see how I say name tag, div class name tag? That's a lot of writing, and I don't like it. What I want to do is be more succinct. If I say view, it's the exact same thing. A view is a div with class name tag. Of course, what that means is anywhere in my code I have a view, it has the extended capabilities, and it's very easy to perceive what is and what isn't normal. So if I run this, you'll see it does the exact same thing. So given that we've established that, I'd like to say that all the HTML content inside of that div is an inner template. So I created just one of them, because there's one there. Let's say I wanted to make 10 of those and make them multi-selectable. Well, first of all, I'm going to get rid of the red up here because I want you to see the selection when we get to it. What I'm going to do is put a special option list. And what list takes is a list, of course, and it's a dictionary of objects that are passed to make it. So here I'll say item 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll stop there. So what we have here is 3 objects. And when I create this interface, it says here, by the way, that I didn't put a comma here. That's its error detection, popping up an error saying, you ran a program, it's missing a comma, do something about it. So where did I miss my comma? Right here, between something and whatever. I should have had a comma there. And now I have another one, it says window comma, yeah, which makes perfect sense. What I'm going to do is leave that as that. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to get into why that happened. There's a perfectly good reason, but it's not what I want to deal with at the moment. I'm going to indent that. And so now what I have is a view. And this shows the recursive power of the language. There's another view inside of it, which is then annotated with a list item. And I have another error because I'm stupid at typing. And the reason that happened is because a list must have one top-level tag. A list of items would be one item per list, and you'll see I have 2. I have an input and a select. That's 2 items for each list. Well, how do I delete an item if it's more than one thing? So what I want to do here to make this work is put in a div, and then indent the rest of it so that it has one top-level tag. And I have another error. And the reason that died is because see how I have named food here? Well, my load is looking for something named foo. Well, if I have 10 of them, there's more than one thing named foo. That's ambiguous. So what I'm going to do is comment this out. Notice that I can use the standard JavaScript / for it. And now when I run it, you'll see I have 3, like we expected. So I can then take this code and put it into the load of the other view. And so what this will say is each time pardon me, I don't want to put it here, because that's the list. I'm going to make this a view, and I'll put the load statement there, which means that each time, there'll be 3 of these made. For each of them, when they're made, this will run, and then it will look for what's inside of it named foo, and apply this logic. And there's nothing called something in there before, because I got rid of it. So we'll just take this off for the demonstration. And now when I click each of these, yo comes up. Well, how about I want the number of what it is? Self.data.item. So in this case, what is self? It's the element I'm on. What was this list item made with? Each one of these dictionaries. Where does that data get stored? In data. So self.data.item is going to refer to the dictionary that it was made in. So in this case, if I run it, you'll see that it says yo1, yo2, and yo3. I won't go through all of them. There you go. So what we've shown here is that you can have logic, and what's the important point here is that I could actually copy and paste this into any other program that I have, just that, without worrying about a script tag, without worrying about assets anywhere else in my program, and have that work wherever I put it. So let's look at some of the cooler things that list gets you. The first thing to note is selectable. Now, I call it selectable, ABLE, because it is supposed to say that the things inside of it are selectable. It takes 2 attributes, which are CSS, for over and down. When I'm over it, I'd like it to be light yellow, and when it's selected, I'd like it to be a light blue gradient, and I'd like it to be shadowed. So these are the CSS classes that will be applied to each list item as they are selected or not. So let's run that. And now we see that I get its background. Not only can I click it, which then gives it the shadow and the light blue, but I can hold down Alt to select more than one of them. So that was cool. What happens if I want to use the up and down arrow keys to select them? Now, in standard jQuery, you might find some solution to do that. But the problem is, there would be more than one solution for it. So this coder does it one way, this coder does it another way, and they may not work. How did you do selection? How did I do selection? Well, what's the point of having 2 programs in the page if you can't have them interrelate in some way? So what I'm going to do is put another option, key selectable, and that simply gets true. And now, without anything else, I can use the arrow keys to go up and down, and I can select all and select none. That's great. What if I want to respond to selection? I selected something and I want to do something with it. Well, that's another delegate. Here, I can put selection. And I can say, when a selection occurs, give me the item and do something about it. In this case, what I want to do is print the data that came from it. We have item 1, 2, and 3. And so what I want to say here is alert, item.data.item. And actually, I'm going to call this element for disambiguation. It's the element that got selection, and I want to get the data, and then of course, item comes from the list that we have here. As a matter of fact, I use item so much that it's by default. If I only give it a list of numbers, it will turn it into that. So I'm going to reduce this list into a single call range. And what range does is returns a list of 0 to the number. And it's going to automatically promote that into a dictionary with item as the word. So
you don't need the double quotes again.
Double quotes and alert. What I need to do is, yeah, you're right. What I need to do is say plus and then put it in there. And then put my semicolon in. So now, every time I click one of these, you'll see that it comes up with the item that I've selected. So in less code than it takes you to initialize most libraries, I have a multi-selectable list with events that are portable across applications. So that's great that this worked. This is actually an event, and you notice that I am able to respond to it by saying alert whatever. Then I can actually say on load, pardon me, I'm going to do something up here. So we have this topmost view. And what I'm going to say is on load, I'm going to listen. Let's give this a name, myList, and I'll say on load, give me the thing called a child named myList, and I want to listen to it such that when the selection has changed, run a function that says alert selection also changed. And here I can give the item, it gets the item as a parameter, the same as the other one did, plus item.data.item. And so we run this, and now you see the first one comes up 1, and the second one, did I change that? So let me do it this way. Listen, give it the item I'm listening to. Yeah, there we go. The other form, I won't get into why that was wrong. It's dealing with another pattern. So what I want to present, though, is that, I guess you want to see all the code, is that when this view is made, load occurs when? After everything has been done inside of it, and that includes painting lists. So load goes from the bottom up. When you have recursive loads, the first load runs, and then above it and above and above it until you get to the top. Inits run from the top down. The first init because it's right away, and that's something that makes it that you would never do it another way. You might have to think about it a little bit, but there's really only one way to do it. So what it's saying here is, after everything's been made inside of me, I'm going to listen to the child called myList, and when selection is thrown on it, I can respond to it as a method, or I can opt to have another method run, and you see that both ran. Everything, including inits, loads, selection, and everything are done in this way. So when you have a multi-selectable list, you're not just writing what happens inside of it. You can have any number of other components, listen to it, and do something. Well, what's a good reason to have a pattern like this? The Apple Finder is a great example. If we switch over to the Finder, you will see a list of files, and if I select one of them, let me go into this mode here, which shows, actually this one is good. Notice that if I have one of them selected, that's a bad example because it was trying to open up an editor. Notice if I have one selected, it gives me a preview. If I have two selected, it doesn't. Because what preview you're going to give for n items? You only want to show a preview when one thing is selected, right? So as I go down, notice that it changes what the selection is. I'm going to recreate that using this selection mechanism, and I think it's a really good example. After I do this, I'll back off and explain some more about this. But I was hoping to get to a point where the entire point of doing this is clear. So if I want an inspector, what I'm going to have to do is make the HTML for it. So what I'll do is back up, and I'm going to make this smaller so that we can see all of the code on the page. So we have this list, and then here I want to make a second view. And what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to get into hitches yet, but what I'm going to do is make this class 50% of its container, and I'm going to make another view and class cell. Now, cell is display inline block. By saying cell, I'm making divs go next to each other instead of on top of each other. If you don't know HTML really well, that might space you, but the idea is that you can, a span is next to each other, a div is top to bottom, but the difference between a div and a span is actually this attribute, so you can put things next to each other. So here, view, class, width 50, and I'll say that this one is a cell, and I'll say blue, I'll make its content centered, and I'll put a div that says hi. So if I run this, you'll see I have to put top here also, sorry. If I don't put top, then it'll render at the bottom. Top makes both items appear at the top. So there, and let me make that white so it's easier to see. So I'll say FG white. And now we see on one side, I have this thing, and I'm going to get rid of the selection stuff for now, if you don't mind. We're going to get rid of the selection stuff, and we're going to get rid of this load. It demonstrated its purpose, we're done with it now. So if I have this, I have a list on one side, and I can go up and down. Conversely, I have something here that doesn't change. What I want to have happen is when I select one, I want what's being selected to pop up on the other side as data. So I'm going to give this a name, and we're going to call it an inspector. And crucially, we're going to use an option you haven't seen before, auto load false. Now, if I run this with auto load false, notice there's no longer something there. That means it will make the container, but it will not do anything inside of it until you explicitly load it. So what I want to do then, of course, is explicitly load it every time a selection occurs. So what I'll say is selection. Every time a selection occurs, I'm going to get a reference to a sibling of where I am. What's the name of the sibling? Inspector. And what am I going to do with it? I'm going to reload it. What am I going to reload it with? Well, I'm going to make a key value pair such the item, and remember selection gets the element, elem.data.item. We're not going to go much farther than this, so we're not going to get too much more complicated. And then down here, instead of saying hi there, I'm going to put in variable replacement syntax that displays the item. So what I want to point out is that this guy is named Inspector and it does not load. If it did load and it did have an item, it would be displayed there. Here, whenever selection occurs, it's going to get a reference to this and reload it such that the data this is reloaded with is item. Now the fact that I have key item here and key item here is significant. Just to point that out, I'm going to make it a wacky name, like foobar, and then up here we'll say foobar. Now I write it the other way because I do so much coding in it that I want it to be standardized, but this illustrates the point. Now also, what happens when I unselect something? Well, there's unselection. And so when something is unselected, I'm going to get a reference to the same thing. Sorry about hitting the corner there. And I'll say reset. Reload and reset are paired, as a matter of fact. Reload something. Reset makes it go back to the state it was when it started. Like autoload false, nothing had been drawn. Reset puts it back. So this algorithm, by itself, lets me get an inspector. And notice if I select 2 things, it goes away. 3 things, it goes away. Unselect, unselect, and it's back. Now that, I just want to point that out because that list semantic is universal to applications. It's not a coincidence that I use selection, unselection, reload, and reset. This pattern is basic to every single user interface you've ever made or will make, whether or not you use these words to describe it. If you click on something, it is the act of getting selection. Now, when you have another part of the page that's supposed to update when something happens, that's it reloading itself, except in jQuery or HTML, you have no explicit mechanism to do it. Reloading in HTML is removing something and then explicitly repainting it. Well, when you're updating an inspector, the code stays the same the whole time. You don't want to have to go through all that boilerplate of dying and re-adding. So this makes it really simple to work with any pattern you want. And now, the cool thing, of course, is I could have copied and pasted all of this inside of itself. So I could have taken this and copied it, and then placed it here under the div. I think this will work, and if it doesn't, forgive me. But if it does, I'm cool. See? So we're demonstrating the recursive property of the language. And now, I've done that, and that's great. But what if I wanted to turn that entire mechanism into a single tag so that I didn't have to keep writing this stuff over and over and over again? Then what I want to do is abstract this application into a single tag, as we noted. Let me delete what I just put in as soon as I find out. Oh yeah, I undid it. Okay. So I'm also going to... Yeah, that was right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is define this as a subtag. And this, I'm not going to get into this, but if you were working in an HTML page without my environment, you would do it slightly differently. You can do all the code you're seeing, you can run in a pure HTML page without any of the rest of this. That's the point of what I'm showing you tonight. What I'm showing tonight is a framework that runs this. The fact that I'm doing it in a web page is, with all this editing stuff is very incidental. It doesn't matter that I'm doing it in a page. And I'll illustrate that in a second. What I'm going to do here is say subtag ID equals my app, and then I'm going to paste what we had inside of it, except with one alteration. You see how I have this? Well, no, I'll leave it alone. So I have subtag my app, and then inside of it I have the application that we just wrote. So if I come down here and I put my app, I get the same thing. So I've just taken all of that and put it into a single tag. So where I want to be recursive with it, where we did there, I would then put subtag here. Now, sorry, my app here. Of course, I think you guys will see that this is infinitely recursive. It's going to be inside of itself, inside of itself, inside of itself. But let's do it anyway. If this crashes my whole computer, it's not my fault. But it didn't. So now we have that, and we have that. And I can expand it and click on that. And then we get another one in there, and we click on that, right? The idea is itself, inside of itself, inside of itself. So what I've done is illustrate how to take an application and turn it into a single tag. And that single tag can be expressed to any other programmer that can be inserted in their web page without even knowing how you did it. What if instead of a list, that was an eBay product browser? Well, you could get an entire eBay product browser in your page with a single tag without even knowing how to program. You make a div, you put my tag in it, and it's there. Now you saw how we have events, how I'm able to listen to the selection of something else. Well, if you know what events are going there, then you could say eBay listing app. When a selection is made in the eBay thing, print information about it somewhere else. So you see how this extends to make real applications. So now that I've demonstrated this, first off, it's important. Did all of that make sense? Is there anything you'd like to see demonstrated again? That sort of, because if it gelled, I did my job. So what I'm going to do is go back to the slides for a bit, and then when we come back to this, I'm going to be writing in a web page without my environment. Important point, this entire environment is one name tag program.
Yeah, so actually maybe that's a good breaking point to say, essentially you have a browser, we have an app in a browser which is the environment for which you can create other apps.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
The idea that, well, if you have a computer, you expect to be able to write a program in the computer and then run it. You use Visual Basic to create windowed applications in the computer. So the idea that we do that isn't too far out. The idea that you can do it in a browser is nice. Now, what is the reason for writing an application in a browser? I mean, this isn't the best editor ever, right? Why did I put all this editor in there? That gets into the secure social media part. If you can write an application in the browser like this, and you can send it to someone else encrypted, then you can share applications with anyone in the world without anybody else censoring you, being a part of your intellectual property, which is really the big thing. If you're a person who wrote an application for your company, then you want to be able to give it to people without sharing your code with Apple. Why should Apple get your super cool code? You want to keep it in the company, in the family. The only way to distribute applications in such a manner is to do it this way, at least as far as web browsers are concerned. Yeah, you could write an HTML page into an SFTP site, and then everyone else gets the SFTP site, but that requires that they install software to understand. Were I to write a social media application in this, which we've done, then people can receive applications without even knowing about programming and get them without interference. So the reason I wrote this level of abstraction was to power that property. The fact that I get all of this programming power out of it was at first incidental. Then I realized how much power I had, because I wrote the language first and then the rest of it. So now that you've seen a program like this, I just want to point out the file browser is written in the exact same way. So if I go to Applications and I go to Files here, there is a files.app, and you'll see all these other files. They get included during compilation. So I'm going to open that up in the browser, and now you see it's just more name tag code. Here's whatever the tags are. Here's code in the tag. Here's ready, which is another one in addition to load. It's just causality. Load happens first. Ready happens after that. I'm doing things like listening. And listen now means, of course, run this immediately as well as when things change.
And you're looking at the actual code that runs the file browser.
Right, so if I compile it, then what it's doing now is pulling in all those other source files it refers to. Once they're all in the browser, it will then process it with the compiler, spit out a compiled file, and then you get this application. That entire application is a single string that contains all the CSS, all the logic, all the JavaScript, and all the display in one file that you can give to people. So you're no longer required to split it up and have the person manage it. If I gave you this string, you could use one function called to instantiate it anywhere inside of your page, which is kind of nice. Also notice that it did output a compiled file. So notice that, you see how I'm going up and down with keys here? You all know that's key selectable now. I hope that there's much about this that is less mysterious now. This is simply a list. However I'm getting the list of files, it's a list. However, I'm using key selectable to go up and down. When I click on something, it's using the selection event to paint the next column. And because it's recursive, the code for these columns is identical. When I open up export it, it opens up a column instance. There's nothing in that. So if I open up network, there's this column instance. It opened up a new column instance. I click on that. It's a new column instance. And the only thing that changed was the path it was presenting and how it was instantiated, making columns next to each other, which is in fact a list inside of a list inside of a list. This is the application. There's a list of tabs, and I can make a new tab. You'll go back and forth between these two. Well, this is a list, listing the selection. these are created as a list, and inside of those lists is another list. So what you're seeing is a list inside of a list inside of a list. This is one of the first applications I wrote with it to prove the point. If I could make a file browser, I could probably do almost anything else. So I want to talk about drag and drop really quick because I have one of the most powerful drag and drop implementations anywhere, bar none. You'll notice that I can drag anything you see on the screen. The little A here, if I drag it to files, it's going to open up another browser to where that was. I can copy things around. So here we see I have a foo.app. I can take that and hover on the preferences or startup or unnamed files, hold down Alt and let go, and it'll copy. Well, the same way I did key selectable, those drag drop operations are just as abstracted. By adding one line, the same way you add list and it makes a list, you can say drag and make all the list items draggable. You give it types. So a list of items would get what types it is, type, shape, triangle, and then something that's made out of a triangle, I don't know what. And then you can have a drop zone that accepts shapes and triangles, or just triangles, or all shapes. So I could say that this thing is shape and triangle, another list which is shape and rectangle, then make a drop area that just accepts shapes, and both of them can go to it. So I will illustrate very quickly how that works, and then get back to the thing. And I'll illustrate it by a very simple application meant to illustrate the point called big list, which is already open, so we'll just go to that. Notice that this is a list of running applications. Sure, it's a name tag application. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot. That's amazing.
Well, here, this is going to be passed out when anyone goes. I'll explain this now, just for his benefit. What we have here is a page that tells you how to claim your own instance. And once you've claimed your own instance, you'll have an encrypted area where you can make your own applications and all of it, and we can't read it, we can't affect it, and you can try all this stuff at home right now. The reason it works is because he's hosting a server. And the way we've architected it, anyone can host a server. So you can go to our site, download that code, start your own server, give invites to your friends. I'll never know about it, writ large.
The server code is AGPL, so you can read that. It's free. It runs. It's designed to run on Ubuntu server.
If you go to our site, you'll be able to follow this instructions to join, and then you'll put in whatever nickname you like. Whatever private email you like, we don't know what that is. You'll put in this code, and that code right here, type it in, is a code that tells us you're someone we can invite to. So if you follow these instructions, you should be able to make it work. But the one thing we didn't put on here is an email contact for us. So
you can post it to the Meetup site too.
Right. So if you have any problems, feel free to go to the Meetup site and ask for instructions.
I was going to say, you didn't put that on the email site.
Yeah. The email. nametagworks@gmail.com. We'll do it for that. Yeah, nametag works. We call it nametag works. It's another pun. Nametag Foundry, nametag workshop, nametag works. But it's also, hey, it works. Because as I was developing it, it wasn't clear that this concept would work, and yet it does. Fully
Okay. Well, we'll see you guys again.
Thanks for your time.
Good luck with that.
Yes.
Very cool.
And then I'll pass these down.
We actually take a break to make some certificates for you guys. We got little ones at home, so dug on it.
I don't know, what time is it?
It's just after 8.
Yeah. So I'm not that. I was actually going to go towards a crescendo here in a few minutes, and then that would be
Well done.
Thank you. Yes. And if anyone wants to share these with me, just so much for my putting up there.
Keep working at it.
And you can contact us. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. You can contact us through that system too. Both he and I are members of that system. There's a social media application in there.
Well, that's what we're going to cover next, is the social media part of that. So, if we have all this power, how did we use it to make a Facebook? Yeah, we did. It's in here right now. So the code for the Facebook part is very short. Cool. So, as a developer, you must know that HTML drag and drop is one of the harder things to work with. Not only are there competing implementations, but none of them are that good. I mean, they barely work to tell you that your cursor's moving. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I got a simple question, which is there a minimum browser type that is required for this?
Yeah, IE 9 or above, Firefox, Safari, and Chrome. Basically, anything in the past 2 years. It also works on mobile, so I've tried this on Chrome and whatever. We've ran my entire OS environment to write programs on an iPad. It's a little slow because their math isn't as fast as I'd like. The rendering is very fast. Their RSA math isn't as fast as I'd like. Chrome is the best place to run it because their math is the fastest. When you open and close files, that's going to be the quickest of encrypting them and sending them back. But the language itself runs on anything IE9 and up. I worked hard to get the IE9 part. Of course, I developed it mostly in Chrome, and then Safari at the same time, and then worked on Firefox, which has the only difference between Firefox and WebKit is how it treats image width and height. Believe it or not, they disagree on how to deal with image scaling, and it's an insane place to have a difference, but I had to do a modification to make that work. But the core engine, the thing that makes all of this work, is compliant across the board, and the reason it wouldn't work in IE8 is because they had memory leak problems. When you create an event against the DOM, it's not able to automatically release the memory if there's a reference to the DOM and the DOM references the event. It's not smart enough to detect that cycle. So when I have code, obviously when you write code on a tag, you're creating references between the element and the function, and that's why you have to be above that. But I should say that, you know, in all your typical browsers, other than the IE8 ones with the memory problem, there's nothing in this that is even vaguely custom. I mean, like, it's all straight DOM stuff. It should not be an issue to run. So the point of this demonstration is to show 5,000 items being drag and dropped. I did optimization. Now, optimization is the idea that you only spend your time painting what you can see and not what you can. If I'm going to paint 5,000 items, which I have done in the past, it would take 30 seconds, maybe a minute to render. But you'll notice that when I run this thing, it pops up immediately. So here we see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and as a matter of fact, I've got to put a 0 back in here to get the list of 10 items just to prove. So it says range 1 there. And you know what I'm going to do, because I should have done this earlier? Let's put this on a different, there we go, 10.
This is Mozilla's ACE editor, by the way. We encapsulate it and put it in a name tag, but it's
so if I run this, you'll see that each one of these is the list. We start at 0, 1, 2, 3, and here at the top I can drag to the bottom. Ta-da! 5,000. So it didn't render the things in between. I can scroll up and you'll see that it's actually making them, and it's actually deleting the things underneath of it. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I'm seeing a bit of sort of reflashiness.
Because it's making them. When it made a list of 5,000, it made the ones you could see. All the rest of them aren't made yet. As you scroll down, it's actually making. That's right. The point is, just like drag and list, you do it with one line. It doesn't change your code. So if you write code that works normally, you can add one line and make it optimized. That level of investment in the API is a magnitude better than anywhere else, bar none. You can't get that effect with that. The problem is anywhere else you have to change your pattern. They'll give you an optimized method, but you can't use the code you use normally in the optimized pattern, and vice versa. We're very proud of that.
So if you scroll up and down,
it's making them and killing the ones on the bottom and making the ones.
Oh, so it's killing the ones so you won't ever be able to do it.
Well, in other words, the maximum number of items on the screen are the ones you can see. So even with 5,000 items, the amount of memory being used to describe this is 8 items. Which is what it's doing in normal operating systems.
So I guess from someone you can might understand, that performance seems really kind of jerky, I guess.
Well, that's because it's deleting them. It's not jerky. I mean, I could put an overlap so that it was creating them 40 above. So let's try this again. Let's go back to this thing and then say, wait, list. Nope, that's not going to list either. That's my test. Let me go back up. Sorry, it's the white one. I was looking for black. So here, see how I say optimize? It says 10 and 15. I'll make that 50. What it's saying is optimize for height. The items are 70 pixels tall, and make 50 more than you can see. So if I run this, now when I scroll down, you'll see they're all there. It's not being jerky because it's actually making them way beneath where you can see it. And only if you scroll fast would it start to be jerky. And yet when I grab it and go to the middle, it'll take a second to draw because you have to have the scroll event. You have to let up on the scroll for it to know that you scrolled there to draw. So those are all tunable. But the idea, what you should be interested in isn't that it looks jerky, it's that you can do it at all. Because in a standard web application, 5,000 items on the screen is a surefire bomb for the entire thing. So more to the point, you know how I have key selectable, right? So I'm able to select it, And then I have auto-scrollable. Notice that I have here is one of the options, auto-scrollable true, which means as I scroll, it's going to keep the selected item in the viewport, which is very useful. More to the point, I can do Alt-A to select all. Well, I just selected 5,000 items that quickly. And I can open up Droplet, which is a program meant to reveal anything dropped on. So here it says number of files, number of items dropped, files was the original thing, whatever. So if all of these are selected, I can drag it. Notice that I'm dragging 5,000 items there that quickly. It's not painting 5,000, it's painting the first N fading out. But if I drop it, that quick. So from a data point of view, you're able to express the user has 5,000 contacts and they want to move it to another list. Boom, boom, done. The reason it's that fast is because it's only dealing with the data. It's not dealing with the drawn objects, if you see what I'm saying. You may not have thought of this pattern before, but if I have 5,000 objects, that's 5,000 interface elements. But what it really is 5,000 data elements that each data element maps to a user interface object. So as I scroll down, I say, ooh, what interface objects are in view? Use the data for them to make them. And so I could turn it off, for instance, and then it would be super fast. There's actually two different types of optimization available here. There's optimized and lazy. Optimized is when you know the height of the elements. Lazy is when you don't. Facebook is lazy. I mean, like a post could be any size. So how do I, if I go all the way to the bottom, how do I know what the bottom is until I render it? I don't know what its height is. So the reason this works is because I know that each height is 70 tall. Do you want any clarification on that pattern? No. So what powered that, of course, was this single line here. And optimized items, what optimized items means is it erases them after they're out of view. If I got rid of optimized items, it would make them, but not get rid of them, because the browser's quite good at keeping things in display once you've made them. But imagine that each item was a heavily computed object. Maybe I have to get data from a server, and then it renders a fractal based on those patterns. Well, each item would take forever to make. But once it's made, it's just a picture. It's very easy to display. So you may want optimization to mean don't make them until they're in view, but once they're made, leave them alone. So you have those options as a single one. Now what made it draggable from one application to another was this draggable. And so what that's saying is automatically all the list items are draggable and they're of big list type. And you can do any type you want. So here when I have files, they're of file type. So I can take these three and then put droplet, did I close it? Put droplet here. And then put my file browser on the other side. And then drag these three to there. And then you'll see that it got the 3 items and printed out the dictionaries. And you'll notice, what is that? Big list, captioning, code search. Well, the data for those items was item big list, item captioning, item code search. The pointer is a file key. We haven't gotten into the file API. But for each item in that list, there's a pointer that points to that data. And this list uses the same optimization pattern. So you're able to have 50,000 files in one of those views and expect it to paint correctly, which is really nice. And so across the OS, you just put that one option there anywhere you want it. Something like this little corner thing is a list with one item in it. So I make a list that has one item, and that's app drag type. And I won't get into how that specifically works. So let's talk about the social media stuff. I was going to go back to the presentation, but I'd like to show how all this comes together to do something useful. And what is useful is what we call the daystream viewer, conversations, and configure. So I want to make it clear that when you join, when you claim the invite, public-private keys will get created in the browser. It will use your password to encrypt them and save them on the server, which means if the server doesn't have your password, they can't read what it is. When you log in, that blob is sent to your computer and then decrypted in your browser so that when you use the system, you always have your public-private keys, but no one else does. The public-private keys are one thing I download. The other thing I download is the file metadata. Not the values of the files, but the metadata describing them. Every file in the system has a random key and value. It means every single one of these files is stored on the server under a random name and encrypted with a random password. Well, what unites them is that file metadata. So when I say open up file foo, it goes, give me a blob, who knows what it is, and then I look at the metadata to say take that blob and turn it into the real file. Conversely, when you make a file, it assigns it the random keys, encrypts it, and sends it back. Great. Well, if I have 50 friends, then what I need is 50 public keys to be able to send to them. And I certainly don't want the server knowing who my friends are, what their public keys are. So the file system gives us a way of abstracting that. So were I to look here, you would see I have a folder called network. Inside of network is friends. And then here are 2 files which represent the public keys for those users. Notice I can drag and open up in tabs. That's just part of my editor. Ace didn't do that. I did that. What I do is encapsulate their tool in another list. So this is just a name tag list, and you can drag and do all that crap. So here I have their public private keys, and you'll notice I have a value, receive stamp key and send stamp key. When I send a message to a friend, this decrypts. This is the decrypt form. That becomes the AES password that I use to send a message to them. So the whole file system is encrypted. No one else has that but me and the client. Once I have it, I can use it to send messages to other people such that it's stored somewhere. I send a message to you and it gets stored on your server, waiting for you to log in next. But because it's encrypted, the server can't read the contents. The person who owns the server can't read the contents. So, here over at social, we see we have a message. I'm just sending to myself in this case. I'll say new reply, and here I have all my friends. Notice I have 2 friends and I have 2 files over there. Matter of fact, I could have duplicated one of those files and you would have seen it pop up in here because events keep it coherent. Something we didn't cover, and I guess I won't cover it at this moment. But say I want to send a message to myself. Send, and there it is. Say I want to send a message to a friend of mine. This is just my own account with someone else. I'll drag that in there, S3B, and then send. And now what it's done is you'll see that it popped up in conversations as well. Or at least it should have. We'll deal with that in a second. So what you're looking at here is messages that went to other people encrypted. So how do I know what the messages I sent to them are? I save them in the file system. So if I come over here and go to network messages, you'll see I have a bunch of folders by day. That's really interesting. And inside of these, here are examples of messages being sent. So if I look at the metadata for this, which I could have done in the console, but I'll do here, here's the subject. See how the subject is FDF, whatever, what I typed in? So as a social media feed, this display is only printing what comes from this folder. So I can have a social media stream of any number of files and folders segmented by month, date, and subject. And then anybody who wants to write a program can iterate over those to show you a feed. Now, that feed uses the same optimization I showed you somewhere else. So if you have 100,000 messages, it's only going to paint the ones you can see, and not until you scroll down is it going to make the other ones. So there's a couple takeaways. One, you can use this for a lot of messages quickly. 2 is that this is the message here. This is a program. So when you see this, you're able to change what that is. So what I'm going to do is change the background color of that to prove that it's not like a rigid social media program with text, but that this is a framework for making anything you want it to be. Because maybe you want to send a get me a pizza message, or a mechanics estimate, or a video, or the state of a graphing calculator, or whatever it is you want to message back and forth. So if we go to network, plugins, show, because there's 2. There's a plugin for creating a message and a plugin for showing it. There's a way to create it, there's a way to show it. So then I go to post, which is the type of message that was sent as, and I will make the class for it read. Now you're familiar with this syntax from earlier. One second. So you see this is a view, and inside of it is a div, and then here it says if there's a subject, print it out in a pre. And then this is variable replacement with the information from that. Notice that this pointer, the path to the message is specified, so this becomes a pointer to the message that I'm displaying. So by putting red there, save it, come back here and I can double click social to reload it. I don't think I saved it.
That if syntax is basic jQuery templates syntax, by the way.
Oh, I noticed what I did. I put it in the wrong spot. So get rid of the red and put the padded red here. Sorry, what I want to do is reload daystream. That was annoying. Excuse me for being highly annoying. One second. By the way, it's doing it now. It's bringing it down. It's doing its own thing, whatever. It lights up. Go here. Daystream. Now I want to edit the plugin. So network, plugins, show, post. Right, I'm having a hard time understanding why that didn't work. Oh, I'm sorry. I know why that's not working. I disabled compilation. So I have to compile the tag. In my demo, which I'll open up now, it slows it down, but it compiles every program as it shows it. In this one, it optimizes it, so it compiles it once, and then uses that compiled version. So even though I'm changing it, it's not getting recompiled. To show you what's going on, I'll go to my online demo. That won't work. Not bad though. So I'm online here, and here's our website, domalgebra.com. And then what I'll do is I'll go to the demo, and this worked 10 minutes ago, so. S3, Amazon. This isn't our fault. Amazon has had a hard time with life.
We had problems all today with it, to be honest with you.
Did you? Yeah. I had one earlier too. Sorry, it's Amazon, not me. That's what they all say. So there we go. That's the demo. Now this looks like it's saving to a file system, but it's all in RAM. So when I quit this, it doesn't actually save anything. So we'll quit out of this. We'll go to Files, Application, Network, Plugins, Show, Post, change this to red, save it, open up Daystream, make a new post. Notice that I could have chosen any one of the programs that were available, but I'll choose Post. And now when it prints, it's red. So if I wanted to change anything about this, I could say I wanted to have a pre, and then I wanted to say div, hi there. And then I want, instead of being red, I'll say green is a background color, and then FG yellow is a foreground color. Save that, close that, and reopen it. And so now we see we have green and red. Well, the point there is that any name tag program, as you've seen tonight, is a valid target for turning it into a message type. So what we want is a messaging system that's not only private, but gives the user complete control to determine what goes on with their messaging stream. So that's something you'll never see in Facebook. Not only is it not private, but you have to accept what they give you, end of story. And nobody with the computer in the modern age would accept it on their computer, but apparently we accept it in the web page. So that was just a quick introduction. I think the takeaway points is that you can do this work in a web page without my environment. So you can, I guess I'll show that really quick, and that'll be the last thing that we show here. So what I'm going to do is go to my web page online, which is GitHub, DOM Algebra name tag. And then here we have my commit after I made all of it, so there's not a lot of history there. I'm going to download a zip. Right? And now I'm going to look at my downloads. Got it. I'm going to show it to Finder. Here it is. Open it up. Look at it by date modified. Oh, downloads date modified. Am I missing? There it is. So I did that a lot of times apparently. And now in here, I'm just going to run the index.html. And then we see we have another list with that's just what it is, right? Key selectable. I can select all and select done. You've seen that before. Well, what's the source for that? And what we have here then is the installs necessary to run it. We see there's jQuery. jQuery templates, a version I've altered to get rid of a memory leak. JSHIP to be able to determine syntax errors at the time you run the program. This is the framework itself. This is the CSS for it. And then everything else you're in the program. Now, we didn't talk about traits or anything like that, but we have, this is using code to make sure that the view we display in the window changes size in correspondence with the window size. And then what it invokes is, here's our environment. Notice that there's only one real tag in the page. As far as HTML is concerned, this is the entire body. It's class name tag, script, environment, which means the environment tag will be executed on it. Here's our environment tag. Our environment will be sized to the window, and we're invoking main such that the width and height of main are equal to their parent. We didn't get into hitches, but that allows you to do algorithmic sizing, which is really important for CSS. This is just the focus system and it's boilerplate. What counts is we have a script main here. So you'll see it's doing shimmel, so that again, even in a plain HTML page, you can use shimmel, which is really nice. And then here it has everything that you saw in there. So there's the welcome to name tag, here's our link, here's a view, it has a list of 20 items, it's selectable with yellow and blue for over and selected. It's key selectable and auto scrollable, which means if we come back to the page, and I make it smaller than the window, you'll see as I go up and down, it scrolls it to follow where it is on the page. So the point of this project is that you can take this boilerplate, put it into your web page, and start writing programs in it immediately, right there. Put it into your own projects, whatever. So if someone else writes in this language, you just include those libraries, and then you take their script tags, put it in the page, and then you invoke it as a single tag in your pre-existing project anywhere you want to. So basically what we covered was how to make name tag, the point of encapsulating things, and the power of having a language that works next to everything else you have. Now I understand jQuery may or may not conflict with other libraries that are out there. The point is, people can abstract a huge program, give it to you as a single tag, and you don't know how, you have to know how it works or what it does or anything to get the benefit of putting it into your web page. Even jQuery plugins require you to understand a great deal about how they work before you can put it into a page. But with this environment, you just slap a tag in there and you basically don't have to worry about anything else. So this information, dumbalgebra.com, you can see more about it. And when you get home, and if you do decide to sign up for this, give it a minute. When it first installs, it's taking a boot image, and it's all the files you have, and it's getting it from the boot image and then writing it back to the server, which means it's doing a lot of encryption. For each file you have, it's encrypting it. Once you're done with the install, I can no longer tell what's in your install. Yes, I gave you the boot image, but after you're done, I can't tell what it is. You can change stuff, and I can't tell what it is. So give it a few minutes when you first log in. After that, it will load quickly, and you can write programs, and it comes with source code, so you can look at all of these examples in there. And that's what we wanted to go through today. jQuery powers it simply by being the means by which we get portability, the means by which we attach events, and jQuery templates is the means by which we get all that cool templating behavior. Yes, I made it recursive, which jQuery templates doesn't, but the core of it's still jQuery templates. So that wraps up what I want to go over today.
It looks like you're using jQuery 2.0. Doesn't that require IE 10 or higher?
9.
So it is 9?
Yeah, it is 9. And actually, I developed this on jQuery 1.5. But over time I went up, and since my requirements, because of the code and tag, are the same as jQuery 2.0, there was no downside in using it. Because even when I was using jQuery 1.7, you were still restricted to IE 9. And that's a good point. Yeah, jQuery 2.0 is IE 9 and above, not 10. So anywhere jQuery 2.0 works, we do too. We kind of feel that way. And that's why they made a 2.0 version, because they had the same requirements. Their memory management, what they did. And remember, jQuery is doing memory management. Well, I just wanted to bring you back to that inspector. You know what I wrote the inspector and then the tabs went there? That reload mechanism, the way you do reloading is one of our big wins. There is no other web environment that has the same concept of reloading, and yet it's so basic to user interfaces. That reloading requires the memory management stuff. And jQuery does reloading too. When you say click and then you delete it and you do something else, it is in the background going through and getting rid of them and remaking them. We do some of the same stuff and they work together. So with that, I hope you have fun with the examples in there, and they can take you a long way. No, the documentation isn't as much as we'd like, but remember, at this point in time, we're emphasizing an avenue for secure social media to grow. We're not really trying to, we're not really trying to offer a fully, industry-ready programming language, but it is that way. We just haven't documented it that way.
Yeah, that's about the only thing that separates it from being able to sit down at home and write your own programs right now. And we are working on that.
Yeah, we just don't have a PDF that leads through the list of all available functions. But you can get a lot of that from the examples, and trust me, it's on our minds. We want it really bad. So the other thing, and I put this to the crowd, anybody see anything like this? Is there any way to achieve the same thing anywhere else? Because if there is, I want to know about it. I've asked this question a lot.
There's some similarities to Angular. We talked about this last time, but obviously,
maybe for their benefit. Like what's similar?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're familiar with AngularJS at all, but the idea of being able to construct your own tags, for example, to take items and say, I have a tab, for example. Tab controls oftentimes are rendered as a series of divs and classes and spans. Well, in AngularJS, you can create a thing called a directive, which is a tag in that case, and you can put it on the page. Similarly, there's obviously some very far-reaching use cases that this does that Angular does not do. Specifically the social media aspect, the encrypted. There's a whole set of things here, but there are some similarities with Angular in some cases.
Yeah, Angular is more of a flat thing. They let you make tags, but as far as I understand, you can't make a tag which is itself, well, you can make a tag composed of other tags, can't you? Yeah, but they all have to be flat. So you make a bunch of flat tags and then you can invoke them inside of each other, if I understand correctly. Because each tag needs its own script tag to define it, and script tags aren't recursive themselves. So by putting code in the tag, we can define a template with code that has code. And honestly, a view is an anonymous template. We make a script tag, it has a name. If you make a view, you're making a script tag, it just doesn't have a name. It's made once for right there. So the anonymous template part just gets rid of boilerplate that you as a developer would have to do by hand. In Angular, you could get the same effect, but you would have to manage a flat namespace, which means a person porting an application from one to the other would have to know exactly what to copy and paste instead of just selecting a range and moving it over. But there are some similarities, and over time, Google is catching up, trying to catch up to this by adding some of, like Google till recently didn't have the ability to dynamically execute new tags. So everything had to be there at compile time. And you couldn't give them, provide a string and then make new stuff. They've recently edged a little bit in that direction, but not to the point of having compiled output files that include CSS and the logic and the code all in one. So one day I hope a multi-billion-dollar corporation catches up with me like that. Good luck. And with that, of course, you're welcome to, first of all, tell your friends about it if they're interested in programming. And honestly, if you're working in a web dev shop, once you get used to this, I can do stuff in this that I would not know how to do anywhere else. As a matter of fact, I'll show you one contract I'm doing for somebody right now that utilizes D3.
How about testability? So if the code is within the elements or the views, how can you unit test them?
Because you can separate them. So what you can say is this view does whatever it does, and so long as it does it in some separate test, you're guaranteed that the name as you move it in will be tested. So you can decompose it into a series of separable items, and as a development shop, you would say, you're going to make a selection widget that when it's done, presents 100 items corresponding to different countries in the world with whatever information. But what you first make is just an empty tag called country list. The other people put country list into their code, and it does nothing. It's just an empty space. As these people develop, your code automatically gets the features they've put into it. So testing is a part of it and being able to decompose it. Conversely, and using the same mechanism, this allows you to split up a program into any number of separable pieces that can be worked on individually. So you work on the drop-down for the state list. You worked on a map where you click. You work on a selectable list that takes all of it and prints one at one. And by working on it individually, you're guaranteed that the whole can come together. So, do that part.
That's excellent. How about code that, I guess, would be sort of, let's say, cross-cutting concerns? Let's say a logging mechanism or something like that.
I use traits.
Along those lines, where would the actual code that is not necessarily tied to the unique kept and how it can be shared amongst users.
Good point. So there's a couple ways to do that. One, of course, is that you can just define a script tag and then put it in manually. But what we have is something called a trait, and I can illustrate this in our boilerplate code here. Imagine what I want to have happen is I want to say this. When it's loaded, I want to say alert, hi there.
Is it like aspect-oriented programming traits?
It is, yeah. Actually, I have it both ways. So I have an extend attribute, and extend says take every class by this name and automatically apply a trait to it. So I'm going to save this and go back, and where are we here? And run it, and it says hi there, right? Well, what I can do then is, first of all, let me change this highlighting so that it's easier to see. Okay. So I'm going to take this code and move it out. I'm actually going to copy this whole thing here, and I'll call this print hello. And now, having done that, I can erase the load here and replace it with a statement that says print hello. And 1 second. And I have a error. Yeah, I see. 1 second. You can't. This as Shiml, I have to put a closed script in. Everything inside of it can be Shiml, but not that itself. So there, we get hi there the same way. So any amount of logic could have been expressed in here, applied as a single attribute. So for instance, if I want to secure this view in the TagOS environment, I may only want a view to appear when you're a certain user, a group of users. So what I say is secure, and then I would put the group, users. And so this tag by itself means that it won't be loaded, and only when users are in the correct group will the thing be shown. And how does that work? Well, it applies logic that says autoload false. So up here in the print thing, it would say autoload false. And so now, automatically, when I put print hello here, this will be autoload false. And then I would put code in loaded that listens for the group to change. And when the group changes, it causes reload on itself. So you can abstract, in other words, it's runtime inheritance. Inheritance is normally done at compile time. It's the idea that you have two classes, and at compile time, you combine them to make a third class that acts as if it was a defined class. Well, traits are the opposite. It's the idea that as you instantiate something, you add methods to it on an increasing
Composition versus inheritance.
That's right, yeah, composition versus inheritance, absolutely. And so what you could do here, this function works, but I haven't used it in forever, is to say print hello. I doubt this is going to work, guys. It's been almost a year since I tried it. So I'm not going to try it, I'm just going to put it here. But what happens here, see how this says ID print hello extends main? That means this thing will automatically get that as a trait. So say somebody else wrote code, but I can't change the code they wrote. I can use this mechanism to affect it without having to put anything into their thing. So, it's just keeping track of dictionaries when it's made and adding stuff. And there's an entry that says, what's the extend table for this? So main has an extend table, and you add to it by doing that. Now our code's in there. There's more features like that, but traits in particular are some of the most powerful things that I work with, because you can do so much fun stuff with them. For instance, a trait could add selection, and I just wanted to point this out. Say I have a selection thing here. I know this isn't actually valid for a name tag program because it's not a list, right? But say I have selection here, and then say on my trait I have selection here, and then I put print hello true. Well, in a simple setup, you might expect that this one overwrites this one, but it has enough brains to know that anything that starts and ends with double underscores should be chained. So in this case, both this and this run. If it's a single non-double, if it's non-double underscore, so say I just have foo, and then here I have foo, then this actually gets invisibly a super thing. So I believe this is, I don't remember, but this does work. So in this case, only foo would run, but by calling super, it causes that one to run.
And the underscores denote events usually.
Always. Double underscores denote delegates, and a delegate is a function that is meant to be called by someone else. So because I use it as a convention, I can always be sure that double underscores are meant to be chained, do all of them, while non-double underscores are meant to be super. Choose if you want to do the one. And that lets you override or chain as you desire. And what's chaining? Well, chaining is the idea that where these double underscores, it uses a closure to run both. It says, oh, that's there, fine, it's running. And that's how self gets in there too, for what it's worth. But that's there. When this one gets run, oh, it's already there, make a new function that will call both and put it in its place. So when you say self.selection, you may not be calling the method you originally created. You may be calling a method that will pass through all the arguments to the one that you created. And in that way, and that's, I mean, that's really important. I don't know, there's a lot of stuff you can't do without it. And it's one of the things I'm very proud about the environment that isn't obvious at first, is that you can do those type of tricks. So, I mean, inits, if you have a trait and you have a init, and you have here, and it's a init, you definitely want both inits to run. You're saying do that and then do that. So you can see how hard it would be to work without it. And of course, this is all synonymous to having said this. So I could do the $sign syntax, or I could have just said traits. And that can be applied to a view too. So instead of putting it there, I could have said, and so then this would be a view that has that trait and that trait applied to it. And of course a name tag could do the same thing, so this also works. You know, to say, my app, somebody gave me an app, but and this thing has a selection on it, but I want to make sure that whenever selection happens, it reloads something somewhere in the document. One of the big purposes of chaining is if you have a list, then you know selection occurs on it. But by using a trait, you can then say trait reloads inspector. And so you can take a list, and without changing the list, except for the addition of the one line, you can introduce behavior that causes it to do something somewhere else. And I'm not aware of another environment that has quite the same thing. Again, if anyone knows you, work with SAM. Well, SAM, wait, spell it.
WPF, Microsoft.
Yeah, I just don't.
Silverlight.
You're right. I had seen it, and my understanding was that it was declarative. In other words, it helped you make user interface elements, but it didn't help you put logic in. The logic was still somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. It just,
but is there some commonality? Is there?
Yeah.
Do they have traits?
They kind of have traits. They call them like custom attributes or something with the same idea.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So I guess the benefit, I would just say mine's Meetup, because you can put it into your page with the single JavaScript framework, and then you get to play with all of that. So when you go back to your job and you say, I'd like to make something like that, well, you're free to just throw the thing in there and go for it. And so you can actually use this name tag stuff to annotate, you know, take your whole application, put it inside of a script tag, and then you can now invoke end of your application in the page. You know, so it not only helps you with the, you know, abstracting your own applications, but then anywhere in your application you could add list to duplicating one of the other methods. And we really did not cover some of the more advanced options. There's like all types of stuff for listing files. There's a thing called a file list, and a file list does all the boilerplate to make it that if the file system changes, so will your list. So you can say, and that might be obvious for how things work there in the file browser, but you can say file list path. It will then make a list where each item is instantiated with the name of the file, and then by deleting the file, your list will automatically change and update. So the file system isn't just a way to store data, it's actually like an event directory. It's like a way of being able to establish events across applications without the applications knowing about each other. Because if this application listens to this file system entry, and this application listens to this file system entry, they're tied together without knowing about each other. And the file system does not have to store data. I mean, it's a message queue. Exactly. Exactly. And so there are all the events. So my point is I could make the file system without any of that storage stuff, and it would have use. Because then you would be able, if you think about events, imagine you have an application and then you have 50 names, 50 users you want to deal with. And you want one application to respond when a new user gets made. And you want this application to respond when a new user gets made. Why not have the abstraction of saying /users/name, where name is a file? Now both applications can deal with the purified concept. There is a thing called users, and inside of users is a set of names, and now they can both react. As a matter of fact, any number of applications can react dynamically without knowing about each other. And I should note that we didn't illustrate this, but there's event management, so that when you create an event, it automatically gets destroyed when you remove the view. When you make a view, you can say self.listen, and that sets up a listen against self, such that when self dies, so does the listen. You can do the same thing with the file system. So I can say fat.listen path, And when my application dies, so does the listen on the path. So that you can say, I want to listen to when things happen on /user/file. And then when I say view.remove, it automatically gets rid of the event on the file system. So you can have any number of file systems join and then remove themselves, and the user don't have to deal with it. It's all just stuff that happens in the background. Now the benefit is I can have something as big as TagOS. You see all those file browsers? Well, I can have n number of file browsers open, add a file, and all of them will update.
Have you heard of Apache Zookeeper?
No.
So there's what you're describing is very similar to, this is a different problem domain, but in a distributed computing environment, if you have like 20 different processes like hunting for something, chunking on data, there's this Zookeeper sort of like superimposed file system.
Oh, I love it already.
That does, at a different level, what you're describing. That's what
well, it's important. So you could abstract it so that you could say in my real file system, use an abstracted call that calls something else before you actually alter it. That's one of the things I had investigated, was making it so that the same workflow that exists in my operating system would exist on your real file system. So that if you use the right API, you could change files on your computer, which would spawn off JavaScript events that everyone can listen to. But I'm just pointing out that a file system doesn't need to represent values. It could represent logical state of your application. So if I have, this is the important point though. So if I have a folder with users and then I have 50 users in it, the content of each file could relate to attributes of the user. The username, the last time they logged in, their attributes. Well, let's say I have that application open. In a typical setup, I change some data about the user. Does the interface change? No. It's like saying I have Photoshop open and I change the file. Does Photoshop automatically update to show the new image? I don't know if it does or doesn't. But my point is that you don't, it's not, if a program you're running as an OS has data on the file system, it is not enough to change the data on the file system to change the app.
Correct.
Right? It's one way. The app listens.
It shouldn't be that way.
It shouldn't. Right. So this file system that I wrote in the environment does work that way. As a programmer, you can say unilaterally, and I can show you this in the messaging thing. If I went into a file and I changed the subject for a message, that daystream viewer would have automatically updated that list entry to reflect the change. What it means is the API for an application is the file system. You don't have to go into the application and figure out how it displays stuff. I have no idea what the hierarchy of the application is. It's all these views, it does all this stuff, but since it's looking at a file, I need only change the attribute of the file, and it will update itself. Because I made it so easy, you can depend on it. It's something that occurs. So when someone writes a program in Nametag, a novice programmer doesn't need to know how your application is structured to make sure that there's coherence. Hey, I wrote a program and it changed this. Your program is going to automatically update to show that same change so that you don't get out of state. And that sense of coherence, the word I applied to it, it runs through the whole project. And it's actually the whole point, is to provide a coherent environment. An environment where the file system events and applications are all linked together to ensure that a change to one is reflected in the other. And that is so hard to do without a system like this. I mean, not only is it hard to do, but it's hard to guarantee. Sure, you could do it with any two applications, but do it with someone who didn't intend to do that. And this system with file lists makes that automatic for them. So you're not depending on them to do it. File list, there's file list, folder list, whatever, and I can get into that. But when you look at that social media stream, that's a file list against the day you're looking at. So if you're looking at the messages from today, it's an optimized file list. So let's take that apart. A file list displays all the files. Optimized means it will only show the ones you're looking at. So in an optimized file list, you immediately have the ability to display thousands of data points. All of them, if they're on screen, will be guaranteed to update, but you as a programmer use 2 lines to get there. And that's freaking cool. I don't know how else to say it. There's other modifications in there that let you work with edge cases, but I haven't seen another environment express itself that way. It's the type of thing that I kind of wish was in native programming. Something I'd like to backward from the web into a native application would be the idea that native applications themselves use file lists between each other. And how much easier would it be if we did? I mean, of course, it requires an abstracted file system. I was able to write the file system so I could have hooks to do that. But we could see ways to do it on a traditional file system. So I just wanted to say that if you guys join there on the server, the invites that you have, two things. First of all, you'll be able to friend us. You'll see my name is James and there's a root, and there's a Dan. So you'll be able to go into configure. Sorry, let me find this thing here. So, and then the social configure. Notice how I'm in my local instance. This is being served off my computer. It's not being served off, but you'll see I have 2 friends here. And if I go to make friends, it shows me all the people on the server. So here we have everyone else. When you claim that invite, you'll be able to see me and him in the list of people on that server. What was the other point I wanted to bring up? It was really actually important. So you'll be able to friend us, that's fine. Oh yeah, updates. Right, so notice how in this system there are applications, right? So this is actually an application, and this one application invokes these 3 individual applications. You'll notice that this says daystream at the top, and it invokes the daystream application, but that what you're seeing here is identical to what you see here, right? As a matter of fact, notice that I'm not opening the other application, but then I'll come here, I'll click reply, I'll send a new message to myself, and without reopening it, it automatically applied there, because it's a file list. That's a file list, the other one's a file list. Any number of daystream applications I had open would sync. My point is this, say I wanted to make this better. Well, you're in an encrypted instance. I don't know what your application is, so how the hell do I give you a better daystream? And the answer is I have an update mechanism in this. Every time you log in, it gets a JSON data set from an Amazon S3 server, which it compares the modification time against the version you have there. And if it's earlier than what's on the server, it will request what's called a FAT file, which is basically a zip for the system, and install the updated version. So when you claim an instance, even though it's private and secure, you will be trusting me, and only me, in the sense that I will give you better versions of those applications. So even though it's your own private environment, over time, you will see both the operating systems and the programs in it become better every time you log in. So when you get an instance today, you may say, where is that? Well, that feature's not there. Why does it do that? That sucks. Rest assured, not only will the entire thing get better, but it will do so for the entire network, even though the servers that give you the data are your own or distributed anywhere. So all of you can run your own server, invite your own friends, save your own information. I don't manage it, I don't have it, but your experience will get better. So in that way, I can bring the entire ecosystem forward. And at some point in the future, I would say, okay, the ecosystem's good enough. You can now, you can now choose to do it yourself or whatever. Only in its infancy would I force. Well, it doesn't force you to do an update either. It gives you the choice to install it or not. But my point is, having someone else install applications into your private instance isn't exactly secure. Now, it's not anyone else. It's just me, as far as the DNS system is secure and signing works. But the point is, what you see today, you could write an application, send it to me, and then I can issue that as an update to everyone else. So if you make something that's cool, hell, I'll give it to the whole environment. Why not? The capabilities of this whole thing will all grow together, and that's why I think this actually is, it was said enough, a Facebook killer. Not because this is amazing, fuck, it's barely painless of messages, but because I can update everyone and use the input of all of you to do it. So what the entire community gives me, I can fold back in and put out, and it's just like Linux. I mean, the ability. Everybody will make a better for you. Exactly. There's no limit to how good it will get, and you're not constrained to one way of looking at it. So with that, I really encourage you to sign up. Tell other people to sign up, and invites are really easy to give out. But if you go to my site, I will point this out. It's nametagworks login.html. And if you go to About, you'll see a downloads thing here. And I know it doesn't look pretty. I should be doing a better job of that. But see how it says nametag drive Ubuntu? This is a link to the server package with instructions on how to install it. So if you go to this page, you can download that. It's 1.9 megabytes. Well, okay, Postgres and sudo apt-get make it real big. But it's designed to be Ubuntu, EC2, VirtualBox, whatever. So take this thing, download it, install it, and look at your sheets. See where it says server name on it? See where on the sheet of paper it says nickname, private email, your server. Well, after you've installed your own nametag drive, you won't put nametag beta in there. you'll put the DNS for your server in there, and then once you've claimed the root invite, you'll be able to give invites to your friends, and that's it. You know, I don't hold all of it. So what you have is an invite to his server. Doesn't need to stay.
It's designed for you to be able to set up an Amazon EC2 instance if they give you Ubuntu server as one of their images. I'm actually hosting on a physical machine because I like to do that. You can get that for for a year for free. So it's a decent deal. I made 31 of these invites, and they're like 10 people showed up. So if you guys want to invite any of your friends or anything like that, or you're afraid of losing your invite, you can grab as many as you like. I don't care how many you claim. And if you want to invite somebody else in the future, just message Root or James, and we can make you an invite and give that to your friends. Yeah, again, you can run your own server, and it really.
So who's working on the NSA backdoor for this?
I'm actually working on that, but don't tell James when he comes back after his beer. I don't want him to know, but yeah, it's all open source and it's open code. That's the most important thing. You can always hit Control-U and look at the code. If you want, when you're downloading a single text file, you can always download the HTML and do an MD5 on that and make sure it's the same thing. But when we send files to you, they're signed.
So that actually, to that point, correct me if I'm wrong, when I talked to you guys last time, it actually makes it a lot harder for the NSA to get your data because now they've got to go to you and not to
Exactly.
him. Right.
That's the point. If they want to do that,
No, that's very cool.
Right,
That's
yeah.
very, very cool.
Like if I get a national security letter tomorrow and they say you have to let us install whatever we want on your box, I can do that and not tell you, and I still won't feel like I screwed you over because in the end, all they get is a flat table of encrypted files and keys. That doesn't really tell them much. If they want to know something about what you're doing in your instance, they're either going to have to go against your RSA key. First, they're going to have to identify your RSA key. Then they're going to have to try to break it. And then when they can break it, they can go through your file list and see what you've been messaging. Or they can make you reveal it. But the point is they have to identify you personally, and they have to make you do it. So it's harder for them. It makes the police state require, they can't do it for cheap or on the cheap or for free. They have to put shoe leather into it.
You gave me this analogy last time. Imagine instead of going to Google and saying, give me 200 million people's data, they had to walk to 200 million houses and say, give me your RSA key. You know.
Exactly.
Knock, knock, knock. Are you in there?
People are actually okay with them doing it to Google, but if they start knocking on all your doors, then people start to say,
So yeah, and that that makes them have to follow the Constitution. That's fine with me.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
guys, thanks for coming.
Well,
Appreciate it.
thank you very much for getting this going.
Yeah. If you have ideas or people you want to share the meetup information with, that'd be great. Thanks. I was gonna give James James around the closet, but he
Could be on
Yeah, thanks for coming out, guys.
With Dan?
Yeah, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
And you are again?
John.
Nice to meet you. Good to meet you. Steve.
Really cool.
Great.
Can't wait.
Yeah, and you can make email if you want to send us a direct email again. It's TagOS@gmail.com.
Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah.
Oh, I love what.
And if you have any questions or you want something fixed or something like that, just again message me or James about what we'll get right to it. It's not many people in the system now, so you have a Yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Turnout's been difficult. Sorry, we're going to get some more.
It's actually really funny. I expected to do all that in private, and it's right now.
Exactly. You never know what these
So not only use it, but
it's hard getting these groups.
it's a project designed for people to go with us. It's not meant to be
meetups on the calendar so that we can do something consistent.
Yeah. Well, it's starting to feel good. 3 years sitting in my car working, by myself on the element, just coding all this shit. No idea how hard it is. The initial part was great, for sure. But there was nothing in it the first day. I was starting with a blank page. So all I just said is this. When you guys show it to people and they become inspired to do stuff with it, this must be good. It has anything to do with all of us. Because anyone who gets coding is that. Yeah. Some like training is that.
No, we send this up. They have
They provide it, we can say, yeah, Facebook.
They provide the screen.
Never let you see
This is your projector.
And no one that's actually see it. So I do feel that it So, and this is the other thing. I'm going to alter the system to save your emails right now for hash. But the thing is, when you save your email in my system, so what happens is I have all my S3s. So you get the HTML, then you put in your name, email, and password. The email is sent to a root record on S3 that has an encrypted system. What it means is, it tells you where to go after you boot. So even though I have your email, I can't tell where you're booted from. So I'll be able to communicate with you, but I won't be able to know that you're part of this instance or that instance or where your data is all. When I make that change, I'll be able to communicate with you. But as things stand, when you claim an invite, I can't even tell who you are. So try and stay in touch with me. You know, like email me or whatever. So
we can post some info to the Meetup page too.
That, yeah, exactly. People did ask for that. So, yeah, we'll do it. I think you'll probably do it on tomorrow.
Yeah, so, yeah, if you guys want to, I'll send you an email.
Go ahead, sure.
Oh, just which build here this idea about social media.
All right, guys. Take care. Thank you.
I got to go too. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let me know if you want anything on the Meetup site. Email me and I'll get that.
Oh, well, I think there's, like you said, like 300 people on there.
Yeah, we'll get that.
We'll get them in. We'll yank them in, and then we'll make them love jQuery.
We'll see you. Thanks. Intellectual property.
Yeah, which is a big reason I did this. How to write programs that you don't have to trust to someone else. Yeah.
But intellectual property on top of the intellectual property that you created here.
No, what I mean is in a system like this, you would be able to save your insulin levels. You would be able to save where you ate out last year. You would be able to save if you feel crappy or, damn, I did too much cocaine last night, something I don't do. My point is, with that high quality of information, programs can run analytics against it to tell you know, how your life is going. And you would never give that level of information to another person. So this would allow you to finally use any web browser as a data collection point without the risk, you know, getting the value of the cloud without the risk of the cloud. And in that sense, both the programs you write and the data you collect on yourself are intellectual property that are then cordoned and protected. So I don't mean the stuff that I wrote, I mean the stuff you put in. So go ahead.
Right. Well, I've got a hope. Grew up with my father getting patents from the government, you know, and having problems with, you know, getting the patent in the first place and then protecting the patent and everything else like this.
I put one patent in and I would love your advice. I mean,
I don't know that much about it, but it's just
It's so bad, it's not even funny, it needs to be rewritten. But something like you have that would be a secure way for people to share and collaborate on new projects.
Yep,
Without intellectual property, without anybody knowing anything about it. The only thing that I would be interested in is some sort of secure way of timestamping everything.
Which you could do.
So every
of course, that requires a third party to you have to agree. So I saw it at this time.
Exactly. Sort of like a electronic notary public.
That's right.
You know.
So
You've got the electronic.
I say secure
you've got the
system.
electronic safety deposit box here.
That's right.
You get the notary public. You add those two together, and all of a sudden, you got something that you could base an entire new patent system.
Well, that might be your big contribution, because the point is I wrote all of this with the intent of people taking ideas like you're talking about and implementing it in this, because I didn't make this to like make a little world.
Right.
You can install that server. I'll never see your app. All you store with me is a string that says where your boot is, and even that's encrypted. So once you set up your own server, you can invite 100 of your friends to use this, and I won't even know that they're friends on your system. I'll keep their emails just so that I can tell them about system updates, but it won't tell me they're your friends, and it won't tell me where their data is. And when they send messages, it goes between server to server. It doesn't go back to the place. So the whole point of making this is to make a platform for people to do what you're talking about. And as the system stands right now, you can affect your entire idea without asking my permission. So, I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. People may not realize it, but I've given them that freedom. I'm like,
this is going to keep me thinking for quite some time.
well, not only that, but you're
This is
welcome
very
to get in
cool,
touch,
guys.
and I can help you architect it. If you have a particular mechanism, not mechanism, but topology, in the sense of a system that you want architected,
I'm more than happy to take your questions and tell you how to do it. Oh, if you're making, it would be this type of folder, and you would make a message plugin that has this, and then you sign people up, and then they make a message with their PDF attached. You can drag a file to that and drop it, and it attaches it to the message, and then send, and then I'll show you how to write that application in 2 pages of code. Right? Because the whole point is you don't have to worry about the encryption. All that's taken care of. All you need is a program to accept the drag drop of a file being dropped. That becomes a message. So you see what I'm saying? It's only 2 pages of code to put an application like that together.
And the file, the API is really simple. It's basically fat read, fat write, pass.
I'm really happy about how they put this is so simple, but people when they look at it, they think it's complex because they expect complexity.
Oh
But
yeah, everybody tries to make things complex. You know, which is what I love about this because I'm all, you know, I work in newspapers. They are notorious for making things as painful as possible.
Django being
And my whole existence there has been trying to, you know, cut through the Gordian knot and say, no, leave this alone. Don't untie it. Just cut it.
Here, take a couple more invites if you have someone you'd like to share.
Certainly, I do have people. So
we have to limit the invites we give to this system on the basis of how big a server is. But
Right,
once you
sure.
install your own server, it's not up to us anymore.
okay,
So,
this is very cool, guys.
and also, like, I mean, my dream is to have a ranch in Colorado where companies send their employees to learn all this stuff. But in the short term, that has nothing to do with it. What I want to do is take people who are interested and teach them everything I know. So if you're interested in you know, figuring out how to do that stuff or involving some of the people and getting to see what it is, people don't expect that's even possible.
Well, I have some developers in the company I'm in right now that I think would find this very interesting. So I'm going to pass the information along.
Well, let us know, because I was thinking about scheduling a meetup just for this. Something I've never done before. But I would kind of like to have a name tag meetup where people come out to learn, hey, how do I do that? There you go. Because it's either write documentation, which no coder likes, or it's have a meetup where we tell people how to do it. So we will do both, obviously.
Okay.
But,
Well, if there was enough interest, would you be up for like a WebEx? Because all of the
doesn't
people
take
I
a lot of
work with-
interest on my part. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
fuck, the number doesn't even matter. If you're interested in doing it, I'll do it.
Okay.
End of story.
Well, the guys I work with, we're all location agnostic. We're all over all over the entire nation, so we fly into all the newspapers all over the place.
So what I figure out to do is like a name tag meetup, and we will set up a webcam there. And so a couple people attend in person, and the rest are WebEx. And I've already made the hard decision. I already open sourced it. You can imagine sitting with all, should I patent it? Should I make this system? Am I going to take over the world? No. At the end of the day, I will make my money from using it. I mean, I can kick ass with development. Like, if I made this whole operating system, imagine what I can do with a dinky little news app. Oh, sure, yeah, just wipe that off, you know. Hey, that's 2 days later, and look what I did. So I guess my point is, after I decided to open source it, all the other questions were solved. Right. Of course, I want people to come on and start using it, and I want to help them start using it. It can only help me if that happens, and there's no particular profit motive, except once there's a huge number of people using it, I could bill astronomical values because there's no one who knows as much as me. So I don't mean like, yeah, I mean, this is what I'm a person here, but imagine when there's...
Linus.
Exactly. No, you're not wrong, because there's 2 ways to make money. One is to have a product that you make money from repeatably, but there's ethical problems with that as well as just general information problems. It's hard to charge for code. It's they get it, and then how you... So what I'm saying is if I use this system to set myself up as a domain expert, then once there's 1,000 companies using it, I'll be able to charge my own fees, give everything away for free,
And then
make
you
my
can
own
always.
Exactly. And that's what I want. That's what I want. I want nothing more than that. So when you call up to ask me about issues or you email me, it's entirely within my interest to explain it fully and have it be used in any capacity that it can be used. Because the rest of it will follow. I don't need to charge anybody now. Why would I? I mean, it's all there. You log into it and you have all the examples you need. So with documentation, that would even be more so. But this is a basic reclaiming of power from the server. This lets the user have power. And in that sense, it would be backwards of me to say, oh, well, I know all this, so you have to do this. No, the point is, I take the fucking fact that I can't get online and talk to my friend about what I'm really doing because I'm making choices about who's reading it. And so I have never, in the entire history of social media, been allowed to express myself as I truly am. And that doesn't mean I have anything to hide. It means as a professional, you won't disparage a company. You won't say a product's good or bad. You won't express what you really feel about
is this a good investment idea or is that a good investment idea? So it has nothing to do with counterculture behavior. It has nothing to do with illegal behavior. It has to do with the ability to say, I'm talking to you, man. And
If your company wants you to friend them on Facebook, all of a sudden everything you say to your friends is now something that
their property. Yeah. And so I couldn't stand that. That's why I made this. The fact that it turned into everything else was icing on the cake. You know, it's like, oh, okay, well, I also made a programming language. But once this is implemented, you can't go back. The Googles of the world can't compete with this business.
Oh yeah. You get something out there, it's an irreversible process.
That's what I was thinking too. So I'm so happy to prove it. That's why I didn't spend so much time in documentation, because now that I've proven the point, the rest of it must surely follow. You know, but no company, Google could have done this. Sure, would have taken them, you know, a couple of months with the number of coders they have. But their business model will not allow it. So it must be one or two crazy people who put it together, and then it can grow. But it took a few people willing to invest the time.
Yeah, then they have no way to deny it. I mean, you know, sure, they'll try.
No, there's literally nothing they can do. I mean, when you think about it, it's not that they can try. There is literally nothing they can do to stop it. Because to stop it, you would have to say that unintelligible material put on our server isn't right. Well, that includes anything and everything from some random picture. What they're saying is encryption wouldn't be allowed on our server. And as we know, no business user would put up with Gmail or any of it with such a restriction. It couldn't happen. So they literally can't stop the development of it. The only thing that could have happened is I decided not to finish it technically, but rather make documentation. And everyone said, neat idea, who's going to do it? So now that I've proved it's existed, all those concerns are put aside, and I feel the rest has to happen. And it makes, I mean, it gave meaning to my life. Before I had figured this out, I was walking around with a vague anxiety that there was some solution, but that no one would ever give me a shot, and there's no company that would listen to me long enough to make it. So I'm going to go the rest of my life never proving that it's possible. But now that I've proven it, fuck, I've got a full-time job where I sit in an office. And who cares? Because it's done. So I actually do feel that degree of freedom. Having expressed it, I know that I've fulfilled my ethical responsibility to the community. I've done what everyone wanted to do, but could only do with self-sacrifice of a couple of years to prove it. And it would mean a lot to me if you spread it around. I did what you could to make people know about it, because you know, I could be hit by a bus tomorrow, and so could he. We could be taken out by an A10. You know,
we don't do that. I finally found one guy that could solve a bunch of my problems when I was over at the post, and he took a trip to Japan for a friend's wedding or something. Had too many sakis and went off the balcony.
No shit, really.
Yeah.
Well, let that be a lesson on how important it is to get this out of my head.
I had him hired for a project. He's like, I'll be back in 2 weeks, you know, and we'll tear into this, we'll solve it all. He was great, and then he was dead.
But you do understand, I mean, that could actually happen to any of us. You understand that the feeling that I have about completing it is, now that it's done, the only thing that could possibly happen is people don't tell each other about it? How could that be? How is this not front page on every news site?
You give birth to the child, now it's going to have its own life. It's going to start growing.
So long as there's someone else to stick food in its mouth. You know, it doesn't have to be me. So I appreciate that. That's not that I appreciate your enthusiasm. The reason we had this meeting tonight was to establish bonds, big or small, with other people who can join in on the idea and help it. Because I am not the type of person to dress up in a suit and go to VC investors and say, yeah, I'll make this great technology if I gut it and do everything opposite to what I wanted. The only way it'll grow, in my opinion, is if I find enthusiastic people and grow it on the basis of real folk with real desires to keep their information private. That's always a personal decision, or at least in most cases. Sure, that's corporate uses. But as of now, you're as big a part of it as he is or I am. I mean, you know, it's up to you to tell people about it and do whatever you want with it. But I'll continue to develop it. Every time you log into that system, you'll see improvements, you'll see advancements, you'll see new things pop up. But I'll only ever code as fast as one person. Which is why it's so imperative other people get involved. Because no matter how good my heart is, no matter how good my spirit is, so long as it's only me and only him, it'll advance that fast. Right. But what the fuck happens when you've got 100 developers?
Oh, yeah, that's what open source has proved over and over again. You know, I don't know if you've ever read this guy. His name's Stephen Johnson.
No, it doesn't ring a bell. I was going to say there's no way I haven't read it.
You're talking about network effects of open source.
he's got a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And he talks all about innovation and how the ecosystems are built out and how open source is this sort of fourth quadrant where everything's happening.
And the idea behind it well, the problem with open source is so long as you're centralizing the intellectual property of the open source, then there's still a way it can be coordinated. I mean, yes, you have people coordinating, but here's the thing, you can't have freedom in any digital sense unless you control the application as well as the content. So if it's, oh, look at me, I'm so free, I can post whatever I want. It doesn't matter a damn. But if you can write your own applications, now the whole world is open and no one can take it from you. Which if I hadn't made this the way I did, then you may say, well, that's great that you made a secure system, but now I'm going to have to wait for you to create some thing that does what I want. Oh no, there's an API right in there, there's a code right in there. You're not waiting on me for anything. And in that sense, I think it's really what we're supposed to evolve into. I think if Tim Berners-Lee saw this, he would say, yeah, that's what this was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a mechanism by which semantic information was freely exchanged in an application format to do anything anyone wanted with a guarantee of safety. Jesus, that sounds smart. So look at the web we have today. It's only partially there. And the next 5 years of the web's development, in my opinion, as haughty as it sounds, is dependent on this particular advance being introduced.
Yeah, this is a huge problem.
And there's no other way to solve it. If you look at
this almost becomes like recursive darknets.
Yes,
you
got
got
it. Recursive darknets. No, you hit the nail on the head.
Off all of these different servers everywhere that nobody can figure out
no,
what's
that's
going on.
a really great way of putting it. So, all I'm saying is when you go back out here, I'm depending on you to be as good an agent as I am. And I thank you so much.
We got an audio paper to fix something, but then I'll be hopping on later tonight. So you guys take care.
Thanks, man. And you know, there are a couple flaws in the messaging, like the friends keep going from, I should make the friends go from top to bottom.
I do demos all the time. I know exactly what that's about.
Well, if
I go through it and I'm like, oh, that didn't work. So I usually keep a line of jokes while I'm, while you were sitting there doing your extra code. You know, I always throw a couple jokes out there. So
stuff like that would help.
Keep them thrown off, you know.
Yeah, no, it would help too. I mean, actually, I talk slower tonight than I normally do. We got an audio recording of it, so at the very least, I should be able to put something on. Because the thing is, you saw this first person. When you go to another friend's house, operating system in a browser, they're going to go, okay, I'm sure it's just.
Well, generally, there's very few people that I would talk to about this, except people that would understand it.
Well, that's a good thing here. Yeah,
because the rest of the people, man, you can just watch their eyes immediately glaze over, and you're like, yeah, I'm wasting my time.
Well, a lot of people have given me that until I forced them to look. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, you mean, oh, I see, because they expect a topology is enforced by the net that isn't true. They believe that you must cede control of your experience to gain the benefit of storage. I want to store with you, and you have control. Fucking wrong! And it bothers me that people hold that up as a standard. They say, oh, well, we have to use Google, we have to use Facebook. Use them all day long, but they don't have to have any control over what we do. Yeah. And the idea that the browser encrypts stuff means that every place on the cloud that you have authentication rights to is a place where you can store stuff without giving them control. So Google thinks they're being cool. Here's 5 gigabytes of free space, and we're giving it to you because we know that's 5 gigabytes worth of data on you do.
Yes, exactly.
And that's you know, that's not true at all, buddy. So I hope it gives you the same hope it gives me. There's a way out of this whole conundrum that our nation has had ever since 2002, more or less. The rise of cloud services have equaled Mark Zuckerberg said, there's no such thing as personal privacy in the digital age. There's no such, anonymity isn't possible in the digital age. And he was wrong. And that's all there is to it.
2013, the year that big data hit the wall.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I'm glad to meet you in your industry, man, and I just want to make it clear that any support you need to make this work for you is, God, I answer questions from people all the time, for music. I used to do music production and DJ stuff, and they call me at 3 in the morning, which way do the RCA cables go? I answer that shit, I answer what you're talking about. So just don't feel odd at all about, leaning on me for information that you need to make it work.
Now, dude, this is great. keep it up, and I'll be in touch with both of you soon.
Yeah, it's a promise.
All right.
As a matter of fact, I think we'll, yeah, let's
Good
break
one.
this stuff down. Take care, brother. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Wait. This is just me over here with notes, but I hate this.
Jack.
I didn't get that.
Now, did I give you a card?
No.
I gave everybody else a card.
Yeah, I got your card.
I'll make sure he's got a card too. I got lots of cards. It's one of my little side businesses.
I wish I had a card.